Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories today. Beirut's southern suburbs spend another day under intense Israeli shelling. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says 28 healthcare workers were killed during the course of the last 24 hours in Lebanon. Meanwhile, in the south of the country, Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces continue to exchange fire, following on from the stalling of the ground incursion. And as tensions rise, Iran renews its stern message to Israel, warning once again against any acts of aggression. Welcome. The World Health Organization says 28 healthcare workers have been killed in Lebanon during the course of the last 24 hours. This comes as at least 9 people were killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes targeting central areas of Beirut. Well, the Israel Defense Forces have advised residents in several areas to evacuate in southern Lebanon as fighting continues there between Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces. Well, this escalation follows Hezbollah's announcement that they detonated a bomb targeting Israeli troops trying to enter the village of Marun al-Ras, which is in southern Lebanon. Well, developments are moving fast. Let's get the latest from Beirut, from The Economist's Middle East correspondent Gareth Brown. We can also bring from Tel Aviv our correspondent Trent Murray into the conversation. Gareth, let me start by asking you first, what is the situation in Beirut tonight? I mean, it seems that several areas of the country have come under attack. What's the latest?
Well, as you say, I think it's a fast developing situation, not just in the south, but also here in the capital. I think in the last 24 hours, we've seen a couple of really significant incidents. We saw a strike on a medical facility just 500 meters away from the Prime Minister's office here in Beirut, in an area called Bashariya, in which at least 9 medical workers were killed. And then early this afternoon, we saw an airstrike on a Red Cross convoy in the south, and one Lebanese soldier was killed in that, and several medics were also wounded. We also had another incident involving an Israeli attack on a Lebanese army base in the south, which killed another Lebanese soldier. So, you know, more than 24 medical workers killed and 2 Lebanese armed forces soldiers killed. And that's before we even look, you know, at the really fierce fighting that is going on now between the IDF and Hezbollah along that southern border. So these are important developments. They're signs that other actors are getting dragged into this war, and signs of the broadening, the deepening, the widening of this conflict.
I mean, it makes it sound, Gareth, from what you're saying, as though really nowhere feels safe. I'd like you to, pick up on that. And I'd also want to ask you, are you managing to find what you need? I mean, are you finding shelves are still stocking food and basic essentials there in Beirut, given the situation the country's in?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is Lebanon has a remarkable capacity to keep the wheels turning. And I'll be honest, despite everything I've said here, I'm in West Beirut and it feels perfectly safe. I mean, the sound of airstrikes has become very common. And there's lots of displaced people on the streets. But, the cafes are still open, the supermarkets are still open. I think critically, the airport is still functioning, and that is the artery to the outside world. And, I speak to medical professionals who are really worried we might see a repeat of 2006, when one of the first big things Israel did was bomb the airport. They took out this key bit of infrastructure. So that would make it difficult not only to get, supplies, food, whatever in, but also medical supplies, emergency stuff. And then you have to consider people who want to evacuate. So, I mean, this is a historical sort of cliche, but it's the reality. Life goes on in Lebanon, in Beirut, for a lot of people. I mean, everyone is glued to the news. Everyone is watching what's going on in the south along the southern border. And when those airstrikes are audible, the city sort of freezes for a moment and everyone wonders what's happened now. But then they go back to their daily work. And I think it's to, the Lebanese people's credit that they're able to sort of sustain this sense of normality despite this war seemingly getting worse by the hour.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Do stay with us, Gareth. I'd like to bring Trent into the conversation. Trent, it's all eyes on Israel and how it responds to what happened on Tuesday. I mean, 2 people sustained minor injuries. Very little damage was inflicted, as you were telling us last night. Is there definitely an appetite, would you say, on the part of Israel to respond to what happened?
Yeah, well, Tom, I think on one hand, the Israelis are pointing to the fact that no Israeli citizens were killed in that attack and saying that it was ineffective and defeated because of the Iron Dome air defence system and the support of the US. But also, I think they think it comes down to the civil preparedness and training of the cell phone alerts and the bomb shelters which are scattered throughout the country. But then they are also saying that a response is absolutely necessary. I think when you speak to a lot of Israelis here, regardless of their political views or personal position on Benjamin Netanyahu, there is a similar sentiment which connects many people, which is they do just genuinely feel that they are a small nation in the middle of a pretty tough neighbourhood, and that they need to show strength in order to establish their deterrence again. And so I think for that reason, there is a pretty wide expectation and probably, I would say, a majority of support for some sort of response from the government here in the IDF to what Iran did on Tuesday night. I think in many ways we're becoming numb to the news of what's happening in this region, certainly since October 7th. But it was absolutely unprecedented what occurred. 181 ballistic missiles being fired directly from Iran. And you know, that really, I think, is a moment where you're seeing these 2, Middle East heavyweights being closer than they've ever been before from the brink of war. And so I think from the Israeli perspective, they really do believe that they do need to respond, but also they are aware that that response will likely garner yet more retaliation from Tehran.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there'll be counterattack after counterattack, and it just spirals from there, doesn't it? I mean, Washington's made some of its red lines known, shall we say. But Trent, what are Israel's options? What are people saying about what Israel might do by way of a response?
Well, look, the public discussion here, both from political figures and also within the media, is that there's sort of a list of options that they are running through. Now, one is looking at potentially targeting the nuclear facilities of Iran. That's certainly considered the strongest action that they could take, but also the one with most risk. And of course, we heard President Biden say there yesterday that the US would not be in support of that. Another option, which we understand is being closely looked at, is targeting their oil and gas infrastructure, of course, so vital for Iran's economy, given that it is strapped by sanctions. In fact, we just heard President Biden earlier today, remarkably, as reporters in the US yelled out to him, would you support Israel hitting oil infrastructure in Iran? His response was, we are discussing it. I mean, seemingly confirming that this option is indeed on the table. We are also hearing several Gulf states hearing that have now tried to relay to Iran that they are neutral in all of this amid fears that if Iran's oil is hit, then they may seek to try and hit some of the Gulf states in order to try and disrupt global oil supplies. Other options, of course, include hitting Iran's air defence system or military infrastructure, but effectively all of them do genuinely carry the risk of a pretty severe response from Tehran, which clearly feels that it's been humiliated in some way, I think, certainly in chapters of the IRGC, by the fact that even throughout these 2 major missile barrages that we've seen now, there's not been significant damage in Israel. So, look, it is, I think, a pretty testing time right now, and many people here, and I think probably in bordering nations, are holding their breath at this point.
Gareth, let me go back to you in Beirut, because we've heard on a number of occasions Israel saying to the people of Lebanon, our war isn't with you, it's with Hezbollah. And I'm just wondering how that goes down with people in Lebanon. And are they even hearing that message? Is that message even broadcast or relayed to them?
Not going down very well is the short answer to that question. I think the Lebanese have a long and clear memory of the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon. The 15 years Israel occupied huge parts of the south of this country. A small village on the border, Khiam. Every Lebanese knows the name of that village because it's where dissidents were held and tortured by Israel's proxies in Lebanon. And, I don't think that message is breaking through. I'm not sure how concerned the IDF would be at, people listening to that or not. Okay, it's one thing to say it, but to actually mean it is something different. I think this plays into a big risk of Israel's ground invasion now. We saw this phenomenally successful and efficient air campaign, over the last 2 weeks or so. And as they move into this invasion, even, they say that it's only a limited incursion. It's only going to go a few kilometers, perhaps dealing with the border villages. I think many people are quite skeptical of that in Lebanon. But the concern is that ground invasion, it's in fact a completely different war. And it's one that not only plays to Hezbollah's strengths, but it also galvanizes Lebanon against Israel. And even in communities that, have a lot of criticism of Hezbollah, have spoken out publicly about Hezbollah's role in dragging the country into this war with Israel following the October 7th attacks last year. There's this tendency that, this is all forgotten. I think the Lebanese are quite a proud people. And as much as they don't like, the role that Hezbollah plays or Hezbollah's dominance of the state, I think many hate even more the idea or the notion of parts of their country being occupied by Israel. So I think the risk is if this invasion, deepens, if it broadens, if it goes further, if we start to see mission creep, you're not just going to see Hezbollah fighting against the Israelis. You're going to see other communities, other militant groups getting involved, and the potential it's sort of in some regards unifies what is a very divided country in one sense at least, and that is repelling the invasion.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed to The Economist's Middle East correspondent, Gareth Brown. Also, thanks to our Tel Aviv correspondent, Trent Murray. Thanks, both of you, for that. Well, let's bring into the conversation now the former British ambassador to the United Nations and former UK Special Representative for Iraq between the years 2006-2009, Sir Jeremy Greenstock. Great to have you with us. We were just talking there about Israel's next possible steps. President Biden has said nothing's going to happen today, but that's about the only certainty we've got at this stage, isn't it, with regards to what Israel's possible reaction might be?
It's certainly extremely uncertain, and I think that Israel and the United States have different considerations, different motivations, different views of what should be done. So this is obviously still under consideration at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen.
A lot of people telling this channel, they think that Israel's got tactics, but they don't have a strategy. Does that ring true to you?
It does, because you can't go on fighting forever. At some point, there has to be some kind of stop, some kind of settlement, ideally, some kind of peace, ideally. And I see no Israeli political strategy or aim as to where this should come out. Will they be occupying Gaza and the West Bank? Will they be permanently occupying southern Lebanon? Will they come to terms with their Arab neighbors? Will they be at half-war, continued conflict with their Arab neighbors? I think we need, in this conversation, to analyze a bit what some longer-term Israeli ambitions might be, which have not been declared. Because the short-term aim of Israel seems to be to make their deterrence against Hezbollah, against Iran, against Hamas, so punitive that they never strike Israel again. But that has to go on being renewed and renewed if you're using shock and awe and terror to do that. It's not a political settlement. It's not a political end in that. What do they want in their final relationship with Iran? How keen are they to ensure that Iran never reaches nuclear weapon status? What is the final aim of their holding their domination of the Palestinian territories? Do they want to own them? Do they want to hand them back? Do they want to have an agreement with the Palestinians on a stable future? All of this is up in the air. And I think we need to be quite cautious with our eyes open as to what the Israelis are really planning to do in the longer term.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few hints in what Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, said earlier on this week when he talked about how change in Iran might come about sooner than people might have expected. And we've been hearing about a great sense of alarm in Tehran, the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in hiding, this sense that Israel has infiltrated Hezbollah to the extent that it has done. Perhaps it's done the same with the Iranian apparatus. Do you think perhaps more than working out what future relations with Iran might look like, Israel might have something much bigger in mind, namely some sort of a change of regime? Do you think that's what Prime Minister Netanyahu was getting at?
Well, he might have been sketching that out as an aim, but Israel cannot do that on their own. And it would be, I think, an overweening aim to think that Israel could change the political situation inside Iran. He may have been referring to making things so difficult for the regime, the leadership in Tehran, that the people rise up against them, but he didn't say that explicitly. I think he's just trying to say, Israel is coming for you, you'd better look out and dial down your response, because we will respond to anything you throw at us. I think this is to some extent scare tactics.
I'd like to get your take on the progress and the approach of Western diplomats in trying to broker some sort of a solution to this whole crisis. Because here we are, even with regards to, for example, Gaza, there hasn't been a ceasefire agreement since November of last year. I mean, all this diplomacy and seemingly very little to show for it. Why do you think this is the case?
Because Israel doesn't want a settlement, because Israel doesn't want any movement towards a Palestinian state, because Israel won't take up the conditions for normalization with Saudi Arabia, which Riyadh has stipulated should include a move towards a Palestinian state, because Israel feels that unless it shows its continuous military dominance, it won't succeed in Benjamin Netanyahu's political program. And so the plain answer is Israel doesn't want it and doesn't have to listen to diplomats proposing an early peaceful solution. That's quite a hard approach and is dismissive of the concerns of the civilians in Gaza and West Bank in Lebanon that have been caught up in this. So I think that's the plain, straight reason.
OK, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Former British Ambassador to the UN, Sir Jeremy Greenstock. Thank you. Well, let's get some more analysis on what's happening on the ground and the military dimension to this conflict. We can speak to the former British military officer, Colonel Richard Kemp. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Colonel. Southern Lebanon is surely where, we've known for a long time Hezbollah has a major advantage over Israeli ground forces. And we've seen in the last 24 hours that Israeli soldiers have been killed there in southern Lebanon. Do you think this ground incursion was a mistake on the part of the Israelis?
I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was a necessity because, of course, let's not forget that since the 8th of October, Hezbollah have been launching nearly 10,000 missiles into Israel, which has forced something like 55,000 Israelis to take refuge and leave their homes in northern Israel, heading south. And therefore, of course, that their homes, they have to regain their homes, and that can only be done by military force pushing Hezbollah back to the north, given that all diplomatic efforts by the French, the Americans, the British and others to try and get Hezbollah to voluntarily withdraw north have failed utterly.
I mean, some are saying that, perhaps I wasn't suggesting that Israel shouldn't have reacted to those rocket attacks from across the border, but it's just in terms of tactics, the aerial campaign, the targeted assassinations, Israel was showing that's what it was capable of doing effectively, and a ground incursion was inevitably going to result in high losses on their side.
Yeah, I mean, of course, any ground operation is much more dangerous because air operations, the Israelis in this region are largely invulnerable. Hezbollah doesn't have any significant air defense capability, but they do have capabilities on the ground. And so it's extremely dangerous. And I've no doubt whatsoever that the IDF would not have gone in on the ground if they could have dealt with it comprehensively from the air, but they haven't. And it's an unfortunate situation whereby the IDF have to put their own forces at great risk. But I would say that Hezbollah has been significantly degraded as a whole as a result of the decapitation of the organization by Israeli airstrikes and by the pager and radio explosive attacks that took place. So I think Hezbollah is weakened, but it is, and it was before this operation began, it was probably the strongest terrorist organization in the world. So yeah, very, very dangerous. But in my opinion, the IDF will be able to overcome that. They will be able to push Hezbollah north. I don't know how long it's going to take, and I don't know how many casualties are going to be incurred on either side, but I think it's an achievable objective for the IDF.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm told. Really great talking to you, though. Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, let's get some analysis from Lebanon now. We can speak to the independent Lebanese MP for Saida, which is the third largest city in Lebanon, Dr. Abdulrahman Bizri. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. I'd like to pick up on something that you said at the end of August. You spoke to the Lebanese broadcaster LBCI, and you said that you saw the region heading towards a significant political settlement. What made you so sure this was a scenario that was likely to unfold? Because it sounds like you knew something then that we now are discovering for ourselves.
Well, first of all, good evening to you and to our audience. Well, you see, what was happening in the region, the major offensive and the retaliation and the size and the sheer mass of the military aggression that took place and the destruction was really a significant clue that we are heading for a new geopolitical settlement. We're probably what happened in Gaza, what's happening now in occupied Palestine, what's happening in Lebanon, all of these will not simply end by a sheer and mere ceasefire. This is probably, even if a ceasefire occurs, and we are all seeking a ceasefire, hopefully, yet the true conflict and what happened since October 7 until now, after 1 year of total destruction, of thousands of people dying, tens of thousands of people dying, Gaza almost completely wiped out. Lebanon is now being destroyed systematically. The Israeli army has been shrugged and shaken. Its superiority is being questioned, and so on. All of these will probably are clues that what happened cannot simply end with the ceasefire. We have to have what we call a new political settlement. We have to draw new lines. We have to have some sort of an agreement that needs definitely the international major powers, typically the United States, Europeans, our other allies, and definitely the Arabs to be involved in order to come out with a more solid situation that will sustain a peace for years to come.
I'd like to ask you, as a doctor, a medical doctor, which you are, you're also an independent MP, I'd like to ask you how the healthcare system there in Lebanon is holding up, given what I imagine is the enormous pressure it's been under these last 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, you see, the positive points about the health system in Lebanon is that it is private. So all of it, it's entrepreneurship, it's all private initiative. The system has been challenged several times before in the past. This is not the first time we are experiencing or we are sustaining military aggression against Lebanon from the Israeli forces. So we are used to war. We are used to probably manage mass casualties in a very efficient way. We have built our experience with that. Then this is why when casualties started increasing and we witnessed what happened with the beepers and the walkie-talkie explosions, the medical system, the health system reacted quickly, whether it's being hospitals, 90% of them are private, not public sector hospitals, emergency services, Red Cross and other NGO-related emergency services, they all reacted very efficiently. And we had the drills, we trained them before to do that, and they did them very well. Now, what is the negative aspect of it is that the country was and is still suffering from deep recession, from deep political rift, and from deep economic depression. So this is why now there is no banking system in Lebanon. So everything that's being spent by hospital or dispensed by hospitals is dispensed directly from their pocket to the casualties. And unless the government will directly infuse money to these hospitals and these medical institutions, they will not be able to sustain themselves. And more importantly, the kind of casualties now we are witnessing are classical results of massive bombardment using projectiles and missiles that will probably inflict heavy casualty. It's different than what we have witnessed with the beepers and with the walkie-talkies. So now the healthcare system is burdened by a lot of casualties, but we are also burdened with a third dimensional problem, and this is very serious. We have a lot of displaced people inside Lebanon, internal displacement. Those people, many of them left their houses without their medical records. They have a lot of chronic problems to deal with. So now our problem is to handle those displaced, to give them the medical care they deserve. We don't want them to survive Israeli bombardment and yet die from a neglected chronic illness.
Yeah, Dr. Bizri, I wanted to ask you, I mean, as you say, more than 1 million people displaced. We've heard reports 300 people are sleeping on the floor of a famous nightclub in Beirut. I mean, just tell us closer to where you are in Saida, how your constituents are managing to get by. Are they finding enough to eat? We've heard this incredible coming together of Lebanese communities. Are you seeing that in evidence every day where you are?
Yeah, sure. This is one strong point of Lebanon. Despite our political disagreements and our political mosaic, we have a lot of rifts in Lebanon, but everybody has come together. We have a very active and very vivid and creative non-governmental organization and social community. So we all came together. In Saida, for example, we have at least 8,000 hosted in public schools, but we have around 12,000 hosted in apartments and in other places. We are trying to deliver care for them. You probably would imagine the burden of distributing somewhere around 20 to 25 25,000 hot meals a day, and trying to give them all the care they need, whether it's hygienic, whether it's feminine, whether it's for the elderly, whether it's for the children, and so on. Yet, as I told you before, we have probably built a very steep experience, and we did well even in harder times. So we hope that the coming together whether in my city, Saida, or in the neighboring community around my city, which we call the Greater Saida, where we probably, the numbers I was talking about, probably double the number of hosted people. We're trying to cope despite the fact that our assets and the reserves are very weak.
Okay, well, I'm so sorry to cut you short. We're going to have to leave it there. Independent Lebanese MP Dr. Abdurrahman Bizri, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Just before we leave you, a reminder of our top stories. Beirut's southern suburbs spend another day under intense Israeli shelling. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, says that 28 healthcare workers were killed there during the course of the last 24 hours. In southern Lebanon, Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces continue to exchange fire following on from the stalling of the ground incursion. And as tensions rise, Iran renews its stern message to Israel, warning once again against any acts of aggression. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble's interview with Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak, and the former CIA Director, General David Petraeus. Plus, at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join me for Global News Today with our special guest, who is the Lebanese Minister for the Economy. Do stay tuned for that.
Minister, thank you for joining me. Can you tell me if the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah will impact the price of oil?
Well, I think that the oil prices are affected by many factors. We're talking about the balance of supply and demand, the growth of the economy, the consumption. I mean, the forecasts, geopolitical factors play their role as well. They affect the markets. And the events which are occurring here and now in the Middle East are definitely affecting the market.
Do you anticipate that we'll see a bigger price spike?
I don't think that the prices are going to be fluctuating like they are right now.
This week, the Financial Times released a report in which they said that the Saudis are looking to increase production in December and move away from their $100 price target. Is that a problem for Russia?
Well, we are judging based on the difficulty of forecasting any prices. But this way or another, they're volatile. And this is an OPEC Plus agreement, which is in force, and we can see that everything is according to time schedules and to quotas when we're talking about the participant states. And I think that's a great factor in order to make sure that the prices are stable. Of course, they are volatile, we can see it, but this volatility, the way I see it, is not that large. And I think we won't see that much volatility here and now. At least now the market is more or less balanced, thanks to OPEC and the OPEC Plus agreement in particular.
We're talking about a perhaps sustained period of lower oil prices. Are you factoring that into your calculations?
You know, we have different forecasts and assessments, so everything is based on different scenarios when we're talking about our energy strategy. We also have optimistic ones, the best case scenarios, and the worst case scenarios, the basic ones. Anyhow, this way or another, we'll be reacting to the situation as it develops. But now we have the basic scenario, the stable prices, the agreements which exist here and now.
Is stable price good enough?
Well, the prices that we have in the markets here and now are, well, of course they are fluctuating, but I think that these fluctuations occurred before as well. But in general, when we're talking about average prices across the year, I believe that they reflect the balance of supply and demand. So we need to look at the bigger picture over the period, not only one single moment in time. So the average price is okay, and everything is based on the average price.
So Bloomberg has released a report that suggests that Russia is forecasting as much as a 14% drop in oil revenues over the next 3 years. Is that accurate?
Well, if we're talking about the revenue, It all depends on the prices which are going to be in the markets based on the current situation. But once again, here and now, we also consider the exchange rates of the ruble to other currencies and the ruble price of the revenue. And when we're forecasting the budgets, we're considering the balance in the markets, which is forecast by the experts in the markets. And of course, everything is based on the exchange rates of the ruble as well. More or less, the revenue is supposed to be on the same level, and it's all considered in our budget projections.
Tell me this in terms of the demand outlook. Is that your greatest concern?
There are different assessments of demand. The latest OPEC report was released literally just a few days ago, and it shows oil demand is growing and will continue to grow until 2050. Currently, the total demand volume is about 100 to 103 million barrels per day. And in the next 10 years, it'll grow at a relatively high rate of 1.5 million barrels per day before slowing down. However, in general, by 2050, over the next 25 years, experts expect that oil demand will increase by an additional 20 million barrels per day, and we share these estimates. I'd like to note that there were many skeptics who believed that there would be a peak in demand. In fact, if we consider the overall energy balance and look at it up to 2050, over the next 25 years, I believe we can quite confidently say that the peak demand for both oil and gas will not occur during this period. But why we are so confident is we see rapid growth of demand on energy in general in the world, and the demand is growing. First of all, electricity is in demand. So why is that? Because new modern technologies are being implemented. The technological nature of the economy is changing, and AI is consuming a lot of energy. The data processing centers, the search aggregators and engines are using a lot of electricity. ChatGPT, all of that is consuming a lot of energy, so it's actually 10 times bigger than Google's consumption of electricity. That's why the consumption is going to be exponentially growing. We're talking about electrification of transport. So the world is going to be demanding a lot of energy, and the renewable energy sources are not going to cover that, although they are developing. I think that the hydrogen share until 2050 in the whole balance is going to be dominating at least 2/3 when we're talking about the overall balance of the energy consumption. So the hydrocarbons are going to be occupying 2/3 of the share. I think this is a great future when we're talking about this industry, and I think that also there's a risk of underinvestment. So, due to that, we might have big problems because the demand is growing, and we need to think carefully on how we're going to provide for the demand in 10 years, because we need to satisfy the growing demand, and oil is going to be playing an integral part in this process. Indeed, here and now, we can see that there's more supply compared to demand. There are some capacities which are not used yet, but in 5 or 10 years, the picture's going to change, and we will have to search for these capacities to satisfy that demand. That's why we have to think carefully about it. We shouldn't think about today only. We need to think about the mid-term and the long-term.
So for you, the current price depression and the demand outlook is not a concern?
I don't see the problem in that. At least in the recent few weeks, the prices have been volatile. Yes, we can see it all the time. So it happens during every single period. Whatever you consider and take, I think things are going to go back to normal. We'll see the balance in the prices, which is going to be satisfactory to the manufacturers and exporters. As of today, this balance, well, judging by the results of the last year and this year, is about $80.
So what's happening in the Middle East, the escalation, doesn't concern you with regards to price?
Well, of course, I've been mentioning this as well. Geopolitics is one of the key factors which is affecting the market. But we can see that often there are moments when geopolicy affects it rather drastically, but then it becomes part of the baseline. So we're not seeing the volatility from that on. We've been there quite a few times before. And I think that the Middle East factor is already factored into the price.
Tell me about Chinese demand. When do you think we'll see that coming back online?
Well, first of all, we are now seeing continued growth in demand and energy resources in China, including gas and oil, despite the fact that renewable energy sources are also being actively developed and built. Yes, China's economic growth rates are down somewhat from what we saw in the previous 2 10-year periods. However, they are above the global average, and China continues to develop and be one of the centers of energy consumption. So we are as well. Russia is developing its relations with the People's Republic of China. We have a lot of joint projects that relate to the energy sector, and we see China as a partner with whom we will work in the energy sector.
What about Iran? I know you're headed there. What kind of projects are you working on with the Iranians?
Iran is our long-standing partner, both economically and politically. We've many areas of trade and economic cooperation with them, covering all spheres of the economy. Energy is one of the components of our cooperation. We're developing partnership relations on joint oil production. We're considering gas projects and investment projects, as well as the possibility of supplying so-called energy swaps in those regions of Iran where there is a need for those energy resources, although Iran itself is certainly one of the largest countries in terms of production of energy resources and hydrocarbons. Nevertheless, there are regional differences, and in particular in the north we see that they have a need. We could put these questions to the north, and we're in discussion with them now. As for other directions, well, if you look at the map, Iran is a base country in the transportation corridor from the Baltic to the Persian Gulf, Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran. The Persian Gulf is now one of the most key projects that we're considering as to be the development of this north-south transportation corridor. This is the future largest hub, respectively, and a short route for delivery of goods between different regions of the world. And we believe that this is such a major potential project that it can become an alternative to the Suez Canal for the transportation of goods. There is, of course, joint cooperation in agriculture, and we have other areas in industry. So this is a long-standing strategic partner for us.
As an alternative to the Persian Gulf, in terms of that corridor?
Well, I've already said that this will be the largest international transportation corridor. Many countries are interested in it. It's a short way to deliver goods from Asia-Pacific countries to the European part of the world and vice versa. Therefore, naturally, when new corridors appear, this is an alternative. But we have to take into account that trade in the world in general is developing. And we need to develop new corridors in order to ensure international trade.
Does that relationship with Iran cause problems in terms of your relationship with Saudi Arabia?
We don't have any problems in this regard. We're also developing partnership and friendly relations with our friends from Saudi Arabia. By the way, I head the Intergovernmental Commission for the Development of Trade and Economic Cooperation between Russia and Saudi Arabia. And my partner is Prince Abdulaziz, Minister of Energy and co-chairman of the Commission. So we not only cooperate in a multilateral format within OPEC, we also cooperate and discuss within the bilateral format of our relationship, the development of our economies, and not only energy. We have so many other areas of cooperation, including digitalization, nuclear energy, new exploration, production of equipment, technologies, housing, utilities, construction of new cities. We have agriculture, among other things. Therefore, with Saudi Arabia, we're now actively developing a dialogue, and the pace of mutual trade and economic equipment and turnover is growing. We're also kind of developing relations with our partners.
So if Saudi Arabia decides to flood the market in order to maintain market share, that's not a problem for Russia?
Should we start guessing? I mean, we're working together. We have an agreement. I mean, there's a saying that, well, the guesses don't bring you anywhere. That's why we keep working based on the reality of which we're facing here and now. I mean, whatever the country is, we might think about another country which is going to develop additional barrels. Of course, the market's going to react, but for that we have agreements to avoid those complications.
So maintaining market share is more important than the price?
Well, you cannot think about this here and now. So, judging by the short span, I mean, we are decreasing the volumes when we understand that the capacities are much bigger in the world compared to demand. And I guess that we are actually giving this share of the market away from us. But once again, we have to look for a long-term opportunity in 5 years. Quite possibly, the demand is going to be scarce. So I mean, the demand is going to be bigger and the supply is going to be scarce. So then it's going to shift. The balance is going to shift. So I don't think we have to be concerned about it that much, because when we're talking about exporter countries, the energy has to develop in them. The investments, the funding should be there as well. For that, we need to have prices which are going to be satisfactory to exporters as well as importers. So the prices have to be high in order not to stall the process. And on the other hand, the investments have to be returned when we're talking about the development of new locations. So when we're talking about the processing, extracting, etc. So this is all about balance all the time. We need to maintain this balance in order for the energy sector, the market for those who are actually supporting the development of the economy, depending on energy. These sectors, these areas have to develop as well. New technologies have to be implemented there. We need to develop upstream and downstream, so they have to have investment resources and their potential.
The former president, Donald Trump, he used to talk about U.S. energy independence. Now he talks about U.S. energy dominance. You worked with him in the past, so did Saudi Arabia, to essentially create stability in oil markets. Are you prepared to do that again if he becomes president of the United States?
The US is a country which is a great manufacturer of energy resources as well. On the other hand, it also consumes a lot of energy resources. Of course, the policy of the US from the point of view of stimulating the production of hydrocarbons, or maybe decreasing their production, will of course influence the overall balance of the world. We don't know how things are going to turn out after the election, who's going to be elected, etc. So whatever the policy is going to be, this way or another, we'll have to react to the global situation when it comes to the balance of demand and supply. We'll see what the policy is going to be. I mean, it's hard to say here and now. We've seen it quite well on several occasions. We've seen how the leadership of the US changes their opinions on their own energy policy, so we can't guess. So we'll have to judge by the facts and how things turn out.
But would you be willing to work with him to create stability in the market?
What exactly do you mean by cooperating? We've always been open to our relations. We didn't terminate those relations, energy relations. It wasn't us who did that. We had good relations back in the day. It was the US that actually prohibited our supply of energy resources. I mean, it wasn't our decision. Why are you asking me? Ask those who actually made those decisions.
I think that was because you invaded Ukraine, but beyond that, going forward, if there's an opportunity to stabilize the market, do you think it's important that you work with the United States to do so?
Let me emphasize that. We are always ready to work with any country. We never terminated those relations with anyone ourselves. I mean, if there is an interest and a willingness, we are ready to cooperate.
You mentioned the investment that you're working with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, you were chief architect of the OPEC Plus agreement. Is there anything in your mind that would change that partnership going forward?
Well, first of all, I'll remind you that we have agreements until the end of 2025. Earlier, we decided that regardless of whether there will be a deal or not, we'll have a so-called Charter of Cooperation in the energy sector as a whole among the exporting countries. Like there are such charters in the gas industry. There's such an organization as the Forum of Gas Exporting Countries, where we'll constantly have a dialogue about the current situation, about the directions of energy development and what modern technologies will be introduced. We'll analyze the situation and there'll be a standard set of measures to develop the market. Well, for now, we're living on the basis of the agreements that we have. And then we'll see how the market situation develops, and perhaps we'll decide to extend our cooperation and limit production at this level or at another level. It'll depend on the market. I believe that this is an effective tool, and so far it allows us to smooth out volatility in the market. If there was no OPEC Plus deal, we'd have seen very large swings in the market, also related to the pandemic, when demand collapsed very badly. If there'd been no deal, and we hadn't cut 10 million barrels a day, then all of the OPEC Plus countries together, we would have seen a crisis in the energy industry. And that would have been a very significant impact, in my opinion, on the recovery of the entire world economy after the pandemic. It would have taken much longer because of what we saw in the oil sector. I remind you that prices in the United States, if you remember, were going into negative territory. It was more expensive to store oil than it was to even produce oil. So prices could be in the negative. The balance sheet was so on the verge of production exceeding demand by 15 to 20 million barrels, and by market means alone, this equalization would have been very long. A lot of businesses would have collapsed, and how long it would have taken them to recover is unknown. And we would have just gotten a global energy crisis. That is why this deal is effective. It once again allows us to smooth out the sine wave of volatility.
Поэтому сделка эффективна, она, как еще раз повторяю, позволяет сглаживать синусоиду волатильность.
So it works for now.
Как вы видите.
As you can see.
If the interests of Saudi Arabia and Russia diverge, can we see changes to that agreement?
Мы еще раз повторю, что мы.
Let me reiterate that. Now we have agreed on some of our strategic approaches for the next year and a half, until the end of 2025. And our key task is for all exporting countries to monitor the market situation and have stability. Well, I don't want to discuss some virtual things that may or may not happen. The question is, why should we be concerned about it?
Because it has to do with your economy and the survival of your state. So, of course, it's of concern.
Ну хорошо, мы.
Okay, well, definitely, if the situation in the markets changes, we'll adapt to it. Our economy, as you can see, is very resilient, and it's proven its sustainability during the pandemic and during the sanctions which are actually imposed on our country. It's a record-breaking amount of sanctions. I mean, we don't even count them anymore, dozens or thousands. But last year, the economy grew by more than 3%. It's actually more than the average in the world, more than Europe, more than the US. This year, in 7 months, the terms of growth is 4.4%. So the speed of growth is like this. We'll do everything in order to provide for the growth of our economy, whatever the situation is, to improve the lives of our citizens.
So economists who say that Russia can't survive a sustained period of lower prices like we're seeing now, they're wrong?
You know, I want to say that in general, strategically, we are reducing the dependence of our economy on hydrocarbons, on oil, on gas. If earlier, for example, budget revenues were more than 50% from the export sales of our energy resources, now they are less than 30%. We're developing other sectors of the economy, and we're stimulating them. First of all, high-tech sectors of the economy such as medicine, pharmaceuticals, production of equipment, machinery, airplanes, ships, and then there's microelectronics. These are the areas that give us new added value, and they're developing. Therefore, we are reducing our dependence on price volatility on world markets, depending on how the situation develops. Of course, even 30% is a lot, although it used to be 50%, and the share will further decrease because our non-oil and gas revenues are growing faster every year than oil and gas revenues. So when we meet you next time, I think the situation will be even less dependent on world energy markets.
Будет еще менее зависимой от мировых энергетических рынков.
So those economists are wrong.
Each economist has their own opinion. I mean, I don't know which economists you're talking about right now, so we hear different opinions on the economy. I mean, there are economists who are forecasting the growth of the global economy for each state, Russia included, and they're changing their assessments 10 times a year. I mean, they just adapt their forecasts to the facts.
So just again, lower oil prices are not bad for Russia.
We'll survive any price.
Thank you so much for joining me. Walk me through how you see the situation in Ukraine today.
Well, I'm just back from my 4th trip there in the last 16 or 17 months. I think it's a quite challenging situation. Ukraine has had some very solid achievements. On the Black Sea, they've sunk over a third of the Russian Black Sea fleet without major surface combatants. So they didn't do it with their Navy, they did it with aerial drones that find the ships and then maritime drones that they made that have been sinking them. And that forced the Russians out of the Western Black Sea, forced them to pull their remaining ship from Sevastopol, centuries-old port in Western Crimea, and opens it up for the maritime export of grain, Ukrainian grain being about 25% of the world's exports, very significant. On the ground, they did the Kursk offensive, remarkable, achieved total surprise, despite assembling over 4 brigades of not just armor and artillery and infantry, but also air defense, electronic warfare, signal, engineers, and of course all the logistics required for that with drones over top of them. And they still hold not quite 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, though the Russians are now just finally responding. But it's on the front lines that the challenges are really most considerable. The Russians are achieving incremental gains on a daily basis, very costly for them, showing many of the shortcomings of the Russian system with just throwing soldiers into the line using human wave attacks, much of which the Ukrainians are countering with unmanned systems. They don't have the manpower, and they've got to generate more from their conscription process. But what they're doing to make up for that is throwing machines at the Russians instead of men. Drones. Also now starting to introduce ground robotic systems. They're going to have robotic dogs. They have remotely piloted vehicles, even remotely piloted machine guns. But again, the front lines are worrisome. And to enable Ukraine going forward, the U.S., the West, what we've got to do is help Ukraine change the dynamics of this war, without which no resolution is possible. Putin has to become convinced that he cannot achieve further gains at an acceptable cost. That cost has to be made just too high, even for someone who seems unconcerned by his own soldiers giving their lives. That's the dynamic that has to be changed, and it can only come about through a combination of different factors: continued EU support in aggregate, individual European countries, U.S. and other Western support, and the Ukrainians continue their advances in very innovative unmanned systems, additional drone battalions. They're cranking those out about every month. But they have to, again, increase their conscription and then training and equipping of individual soldiers for replacements, and then also new units that can capitalize on equipment, weapon systems sent from the West. That's really critical, and that's what needs to be the focus as Ukraine enters what is going to be a very tough winter. Russia has destroyed every thermal power plant in the country, has damaged or destroyed every hydroelectric power plant, and now they're systematically going after the transmission capacity from the nuclear power plants. So it's going to be a long, cold, dark, hard winter for Ukraine, and we also need to be doing everything we can to help them get through that winter. And there's a lot of effort ongoing in that regard.
How worried about that are you?
Very worried. I mean, this is tough.
And beyond that, how worried are you about the continuing support of the American people? Because obviously this has become an issue at the ballot box.
I think that there is very strong bipartisan support on Capitol Hill in the United States to support Ukraine. Obviously, depending on the outcome of the election, we'll see how enthusiastic those in the White House are. But again, because of that bipartisan support, regardless of who it is, I think you're going to see continued robust support for Ukraine, although one occupant of the White House might be a bit more enthusiastic about it than the other possibility. But I think it's going to continue. I think European support will continue, even though there are cracks in individual countries, by and large, very, very strong. And it really comes down then to some decisions, U.S. to lift the restrictions on its longer range missiles that have been provided to Ukraine, accelerating the provision of some other items, and Ukraine, again, generating more in terms of conscripts and building out the actual institutions to do that. Because so far in the war, They've largely been employing those who were in service at the time of this latest invasion, and then those who patriotically came to the service of their country.
Tell me this, how much danger are we in from a nuclear reaction from Vladimir Putin?
I think it's unlikely, but I think it's something you have to be concerned about. And obviously, it's easy for us here to dismiss that possibility. It's much tougher if you're actually in a seat in the Situation Room of the West Wing of the White House. I've sat there. The responsibility is a lot more real, needless to say, although I still think that it has been overblown. Ukraine has blown through every Russian red line, and Putin has been cautioned personally and publicly by China and India. Both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi have said, don't do this. And I think that weighs very heavily in the balance for him. Beyond that, what do you do with, how do you use this?
Yeah.
The tactical
Where do you
nuclear
go
weapon,
from there?
It actually, where you go from there is you are this even more of a pariah than you already are.
Yeah, I was just in Moscow, as you know. I was speaking to Alexander Novak, the deputy prime minister. He runs the energy file as well as the economic file. You know, the Russians are touting their economic growth last year and this year. For them,
well, it's all because they're just plowing everything into their military industrial
You've
complex.
seen this report of 27% going to military spending.
It's even more than that now,
Yeah.
apparently this year. But, you know, then ask the people how they like that as they watch their social services decline. In a country that already was not that strong in that regard, it
How
has
do
a
you
lot
see
of
the
people on
impact
fixed income.
about the
Well, it'll
from
take
an oil
This
perspective
will take
with these
time.
depressed prices?
I mean, the problem, of course, is that they are still able to find customers for their oil, even at lower prices, to be sure, which is generally good for the world. Although, of course, the biggest producer of oil and natural gas now is, of course, the United States. So this cuts both ways. But no, you have to be concerned about possibilities with Russia, but they should not paralyze you. And this delay in deciding to allow the full use of the weapon systems that we're providing on Russian soil, when Ukraine is already doing that with its own munitions, is, again, that escapes me.
I want to ask you specifically about, in the last several days, obviously, the extraordinary feat by the Israelis in taking out senior Hamas officials.
This is unprecedented. There's never been an operation like this.
Is it something you could have conceived as former head of the CIA? From blowing up their pagers to their radios to getting them?
You can conceive of supply chain operations, and without being specific, we conducted a number of very successful supply chain operations during the war on terror and so forth, and other endeavors. This is just so unprecedented in its scale, scope, effectiveness, and just sheer diabolical creativity. Keep in mind that the people who had the pagers were the most important leaders in Hezbollah. That was a badge of honor, of importance.
Yes.
I'm sure they were fighting to have a pager. And then all of a sudden, thousands of them blow up. So wounding, killing dozens, and then wounding many, many more. And also rendering that particular communication system
obsolete.
Yes.
Almost
and
immediately.
And then, of course, the next fallback was walkie-talkies, and they begin to blow up. And they'd already stopped using cell phones because they believed the Israelis could geolocate them on those. So how they've lost their command, control, and communication system. They cannot coordinate the response to Israel in the way that they would have likely. And the big concern, of course, has been that Hezbollah had, at the start of this war, assessed somewhere around 150,000 various types of missiles, rockets, drones, and so on, which, if they could coordinate a massive quantity at one time, could overwhelm the very sophisticated air and ballistic missile defense system of Israel, of Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, Patriot, and some others. And that's a concern. And yet Hezbollah has generally been unable to do that, in part because its communication system has been devastated, really. This is not just a decapitation, this is a decimation. Beyond that, Israel coordinated very quickly, right on the heels of that, striking over 1,500 targets and going all the way up into the Bekaa Valley, everywhere where they've been mapping Hezbollah infrastructure for many, many years, and simultaneous operations on an extraordinary scale with, again, extraordinary success. And of course, culminating a lot of that with taking out Hassan Nasrallah and also a senior IRGC Iranian official.
Can you say that, though, given the enormous loss of life, it was worth it to take out Hezbollah?
Oh yeah, I think so. Look, you shed no tears for Hassan Nasrallah. Those around knew where they were located. Again, this is tragic, but it is war. And when you look at what Hassan Nasrallah has done over several decades, including the Marine barracks bombing and many, many others.
But this is Israel's war, not America's, right?
Well, America's lost lives to Hassan Nasrallah's operation just alongside Israel, not in the remotely the same numbers. And of course, keep in mind, again, Hezbollah brought this on themselves. It's their daily volleys of rockets and even anti-tank guided.
But Hezbollah is not the Lebanese people. And now they're dying in large numbers. They're not Hezbollah.
Well, again, the people in the area of Hezbollah, again, this is tragic, it's unfortunate, and they can lay this at the feet of Hezbollah's leadership, who positioned their facilities underneath civilian infrastructure and so forth. And in this case, I think Israel is justified to be doing what they're doing. I'm sure they mapped this out, I'm sure they did the weaponeering, but they had this chance to take out the kingpin, and they took it. And I think that was right, and frankly, I think it was proper, given what Hezbollah has done. Again, Israel didn't start this war with Hezbollah this time. Hezbollah did this out of sympathy with Hamas. They have denied 65,000 Israelis the opportunity to live in peace in their homes. They're displaced. And Hezbollah very much had this coming. Now, the question is, what happens going forward? And I think that what you'll see are a series of raids by Israel into the area between their northern border and the Litani River to dramatically degrade.
You don't see this as a ground invasion of Lebanon?
I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think that they want to get into an occupation, again, even as limited as to the Litani would be. Even that's still 20 miles or so, depending on where you are along that border. It's a considerable territory. So I think that's roughly what they're doing. So this is a strategy of dramatically degrading Hezbollah's capabilities, not destroying them. And unfortunately, I've been asked by others, will this change the dynamics in Lebanon? Could this finally get rid of this this cancerous element in their society? And I'm afraid that's probably not the case. Keep in mind that Hezbollah is not just the most powerful, or was the most powerful non-state military militia actor. They're also a social service organization.
Provider.
They provide a variety of different social services, schools, clinics, governance, and the rest of that, really beyond the remit.
But knowing all of that, was it worth the loss of life to the Lebanese people? And I'm talking about civilians, women and children.
Look, no one ever wants to see innocent loss of life, but in war that is sometimes necessary. And in this case, again, this is not laid on Israel. This is laid at the feet of Hassan Nasrallah and the leadership of Hezbollah, who did what they did, knowing what the result might be. This is not at all, I don't see this as a...
The president came out and said, we're calling for a ceasefire, and now Politico releases a report essentially saying that Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein okayed an invasion of Lebanon.
You'll have to ask them about that.
But is this something in your mind that squares with America's policies? The president saying one thing and his people doing another.
Yeah, you refer that to the administration. I'll let them speak for themselves.
Tell me this. You say that Hezbollah will still remain despite this for the Gulf Arab countries.
Much diminished. And it'll take quite some time to rebuild it. Again, they have suffered huge losses, serious degradation, or leadership largely decimated. There are a handful left, we know probably, who will step up and they'll reestablish themselves. But I think what Israel needs to do now is even more aggressive action to keep Iran from being able to bring weapons systems, munitions, and all the rest of that into Lebanon, even, again, more than they have in the past, through the Bekaa, through Syria, and so forth. And they should be very aggressive in doing that. They can't allow this kind of threat to
What
be
about the
reestablished.
Saudis and the UAE? How does this all pan out for them?
I'm sure they shed absolutely no tears for Hassan Nasrallah. They are rightly very concerned about the lot and life of civilians, and especially of the Palestinians in Gaza. And I've been suggesting publicly for a number, since the beginning, that there needs to be a vision not just for the degradation of Hamas, but for the security of Gaza, in which Hamas will no longer have a role. But unless you actually secure that area and provide organized humanitarian assistance, begin reconstruction, begin the establishment of alternative governing mechanisms and provision of security by trained and equipped Palestinian security forces, if you don't do that, what you have is a continuation of a situation that is a humanitarian disaster and a vacuum. But actually that vacuum is being filled. And it's being filled by remnants of Hamas who will not be able to get the arms and ammunition and weapon systems through the tunnels underneath the southern border, because Israel is and should continue to control this. They should not give that up, in my view, despite what some are saying to get a ceasefire. I think they need to retain control of that. Nonetheless, Hamas will reconstitute individually in terms of soldiers unless there is security established and there's no longer a place for them in Gaza. And that would require, I think, incremental occupation by Israeli defense forces to provide security, and then rapidly thinning out and moving on to another area. Start in the north, come a mile in, east-west wall, a couple north-south walls. You have gated communities, just as we established in Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, and Baquba, and so forth. Biometric ID cards for everyone in there. Start humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, then getting a better life for the people, and then introducing Palestinian security forces that could likely be trained by the U.S. At the Jordan International Police Training Center and equipped and overseen. Then you can get humanitarian organizations in an organized way rather than this sort of haphazard way with gangsters taking over the trucks the minute they get inside the border. And you can ensure that Hamas does not have any governance authority in that territory, which is critical.
What do you see when you look at Iraq today? Disaster?
I see a country that Iran is trying to Lebanonize, but one that is not welcoming Lebanization, but has elements within it that are furthering that particular cause. So let me explain. It's a country that has had successive democratic elections and transition of power from one party to another without much violence. Yes, one of those took about 9 months of wrangling to get to it, but that is ongoing. It's a country in which you see significant Iranian influence, but it's also one in which you see significant resistance to that influence, and not just by the Sunni and Kurds, but by actual major Shia elements as well, who do not want to become the 51st state of Iran, do not want to see their country turned into Lebanon by the Iranian-supported political figures and militias having undue influence in the parliament and then also on the streets. But they're a force to be reckoned with. They're a big concern. They're pushing the government to reduce our presence over time and so forth. So again, there are some features that are really quite encouraging. The reconstruction, the economy is booming. There's corruption. Yes, there's bureaucracy. Yes, there's, again, undue influence of militias. But again, if you look at that country nowadays, it bears no resemblance to the Iraq that we knew and came to love during the surge in Iraq and so forth, with all the damage and destruction. You know, the road from the airport is now no longer the most dangerous road in the world. It's one of the most attractive in the world. There's malls going up. There's hotels. There's all of this. So again, it's complex. It's complicated. And alongside the signs of progress are signs of concern, or that should be concerning. But that's the reality of Iraq. And again, Iraq's neighbors should do everything they can to help Iraq choose its own course and not be unduly influenced or leaned on by Iran and Iran's agents on the ground in Iraq.
Final question. How concerned are you by the Arab Street? And I mean this in the sense that whether they support Hamas or not, or support Hezbollah or not, there is a great deal of anger at what Israel is doing in Gaza and what they're doing right now in Lebanon. Is it worrying to you that the Americans, by supporting Israel, have lost the Arab Street?
First of all, I don't think the Americans have lost the Arab Street. I've been out in the Gulf states twice just in the last, 4 to 6 months.
But that's not the street.
Let me finish. Again, and there is legitimate concern about the Palestinians. There has been legitimate concern. I share concern about the Palestinians, especially in Gaza right now, given the damage and destruction that has taken place there and the fragile humanitarian existence that many of them experience. And just imagine the hygiene issues in a country where so much has been destroyed with no electricity, reliably, water, sewers, and all the rest of that. So again, they had to bring back smallpox vaccinations because that broke out, again, for the first time in just about anywhere at real scale. So look, I share the concern about that, and I think it's legitimate for them to be concerned, and I'd like to see a vision. I'd like to see a vision for a better future for the Palestinians in Gaza, and while we're at it, in the West Bank. Now, Palestinians bear some responsibility here too. They turned down Ehud Olmert's and Ehud Barak's and the Camp David offers many times, and they are in a much worse situation as a result of that. And I understand their fragility and also the political dynamics surrounding Benjamin Netanyahu and so forth. But again, I think the Arab Street should be concerned about it. I think it's a reasonable concern, and there should be actual. Not just a response to the street, there ought to be a response to doing the right thing, to again provide the vision for Gaza in the future that is lacking so far. Even the Minister of Defense has publicly called for this vision, and it has not been forthcoming but from the Israeli Prime Minister. It needs to. And again, if they can't figure out how to do it, just start in the north, go to the south, gated communities all the way down, learn while doing. You don't need a counterinsurgency field manual for that. You can figure it out trial by error.
Anger at us. When does this blow back on us? Because we're seen as supporting it.
I don't see it right now. I mean, again, look, the U.S. has always been, according to the Arab Street, the source of every problem in the region, and also, ironically, the solution to every problem. I spent so many years of my life out there. I have gone through this. I've experienced it. We'll see if this transpires into something. I don't see a great resurgence of Islamist extremism in the region, in part because, of course, we enabled local partners to eliminate the Islamic State extremist caliphate, both in Iraq and in northeastern Syria. And as long as we continue to support those partners, I don't think you'll see the capability come back that could extend operations into Europe, much less into the United States. Need to do more about the Islamic State Khorasan group centered on Afghanistan, which obviously carried out the operation in Moscow that did illustrate the capacity to carry out operations far from their base. That's a concern. But I don't see that particular threat the way as anywhere near as bad as it has been even in relatively recent years. I'm worried about it in Africa, but again, that's a much more relevant issue in those countries than it is actually, again, having an ability to carry out international attacks.
David, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Guatemala. Adventure awaits at Guatemala. You can dare to explore the jungles or go on a canopy tour. The rainforests at Guatemala are perfect for thrill seekers to engage in many action-packed adventures. Guatemala is in fact known for its great outdoors. Its subtropical rainforests are protected, so people can enjoy nature-friendly activities such as hiking, biking, and horse riding. You can also hike up the Mayan pyramids. Tikal is a famous archaeological site hidden deep within the rainforest, where 70-meter or 230 feet high pyramids are seen through the canopies. It is a known UNESCO World Heritage Site that has more than 3,000 structures. And if a pyramid isn't enough for you, then you can also try hiking up an active volcano. Guatemala's Volcan Pacaya remains one of the most hiked volcanoes in the country. Molten lava slowly pours through its summit, creating huge dust and lava fields that admittedly create an impressive landscape. Also popular in Guatemala is the breathtaking Caribbean coast. You can reach it by boating along the Rio Dulce. It is a highly recommended trip as you'll get to experience a unique, isolated island feel. There, you'll arrive to hammocks and a rustic-themed beachside. Of course, you should go meet the locals. Explore the unique highlands region of western Guatemala, which is also known in Spanish as El Altiplano. Many of the modern-day indigenous Mayan groups reside there, and it's fantastic to listen to them speak in their native tongue. The locals retain the sacred rituals of their ancestors too, and you'll definitely enjoy the view of the great mountains and untouched beauty of the region's surroundings. Take a trip to the city proper. Although most tourists would rather skip the traffic-induced capital, you should still pay a visit. The place still has enticing gems yet to be discovered.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
From the blackness of this liquid, the Arabs of ancient times wrote down their letters, and they were messages of light to the world. They occupy an important position in Arab culture during the eras before Islam and the ones that came after the advent of it. Ancient civilizations knew and used the color black, and they have been using it since as far back as 5,000 years ago, and they used it to create tangible records of human memory. It is the primary tool for the art of calligraphy. Rather, it is more appropriate to label it as calligraphy itself. The chemical industries developed due to the scientific heritage of the Arabs. There are many books and journals written regarding this industry that is known as alchemy. It contains a mixture of magic and astrology and mysterious symbolic phrases that obscure the clarity and quality of the text. We have obtained knowledge of these concepts and messages imbued from past heritage. They contain information regarding the manufacturing of writing materials, pharmaceuticals, perfumes, crafting military instruments, jewels, metals, coin minting, and magical games. Among these books were works that contain more than one of the discussed chemical industries, including information on how to manufacture various types of ink and midad. The publication, Zinat al-Kataba, by Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi, the renowned physician and chemist who passed away in 311 Hijri. Its subject matter is the manufacturing of manuscripts, inks, including secret types of inks, and writing tricks. It also included methods of removing traces of ink from paper, papyrus, parchment, and other materials. In addition to this, there were recipes for inks made for travel that could be preserved for extended durations, inks that would only appear at night, and others that would gradually disappear. Among the early books regarding the manufacturing of Arab manuscripts is Umdat al-Kutub wa Uddat Dawi al-Albab by Al-Mu'azz bin Badis, who passed away in the year 454 Hijri. It included many instructions on how to manufacture various types of ink. Each calligrapher would prepare their own ink according to the materials that were available in their city. It was vital to be aware of the importance of ink, as it is the most important material in a calligrapher's line of work. Their knowledge regarding this material is what helps them develop their knowledge of calligraphy as well. They also understood how the colors would change after they were fully dried. With the passage of time, they became more familiar with the materials that constituted ink and the paper that was intended to be used for specific calligraphy. This writing material was called ink and midad. The material known as ink would greatly improve calligraphy, and based on what they claimed, I inked the work very well, and I used the finest ink, adorning it and making it beautiful. Midad would become an extension of the pen and allow it to partake in creating the derivation of concepts. Al-Ala'i stated, "Whoever is not good at derivation and sharpening the pen has nothing to write about." Despite the differences between many researchers claiming that ink and midad are different materials, they have concluded that they are synonyms that address the same material. This black ink is nothing more than a mixture of the natural products known as phosphate, sulfate, tannins, iron shavings, pistachia wood, and fresh water. This paste was necessary to give the ink a cohesive texture when placed on paper. They are common materials shared between inks, but each ink has its own unique twist. Many ancient manuscripts indicated that scribes, writers, and ink makers were aware of up to 18 methods of making ink. As was the case with other writing materials that were available in the pre-Islamic era, Muslim scribes continued to research manufacturing processes their predecessors had developed, such as soaking, boiling, drying, and crushing materials. The Islamic world had known two distinct types of black ink, which include types based on carbon materials, which was known as midad, another type that is composed of sulfur elements and mineral salts, which was referred to as ink. In addition to a third type of ink that combines elements from the previously stated materials. Carbon-based materials were known for a very long time, where carbon was the basis of these materials. The carbon products were often obtained through carbonization of certain materials. It may be of an animal origin, such as horns or wool, or of a vegetable origin, such as wheat flour, or from pine wood, pumpkin, tannins, and some vegetable oils. Despite the differences in these materials, by subjecting them to elaborate processes, they were turned into carbon, or what is known as coal. This is done through a simple carbonization process, such as burning the wool that is gathered from sheep. The ash from this carbonization process is gathered, along with the soot and residue that would gather at the edges of the cauldron, so as to have smoke become an important material in the manufacturing of midad. From nature, ancient Arabs discovered tannins, and they used them to manufacture midad. This substance is a result of abnormal growth in certain leaves from some trees that are rich in tannins. Certain writers recommended the use of tannins, or terminalia, which contain a high level of sulfuric substances. Pomegranate peels and fresh myrtle that has the substance extracted by boiling them. The tannin substances start off as raw materials when manufacturing mineral elements, along with another important substance, which is mineral salt. These salts were referred to as zaj. Some of them were blue in color, such as copper sulfate, green, such as iron sulfate, and white, such as impure zinc sulfate. The color of the metallic materials is not stable and changes with the passage of time. The materials used in their composition may harm the material on which it is written on. There are many cases where ink dissolved the pages of copies of the Quran, which are referred to as masahif, especially those that were copied on parchment. Other manuscripts were dissolved by the ink that was used on them. These experiences led ink makers to search for new methods to develop ink, which led to this industry having experts and professionals invested to reach a product that was of higher quality, easy to use, able to withstand time, and to have every paper have its own ink and midad.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, Israel urges citizens in dozens of areas in southern Lebanon, including in the city of Nabatiyeh, to head north. This as airstrikes continue on Beirut. Hezbollah says it has detonated a bomb against Israeli troops attempting to enter the town of Marun al-Ras in southern Lebanon. And Iran's president says he does not want war, but he warns against any Israeli attacks and says it will be met with, and I quote, an unconventional response, which includes targeting Israeli infrastructure. Welcome to you. Now, since Israel's invasion of Lebanon began earlier on this week, the Israeli Defense Forces Arabic spokesperson has warned residents in dozens of places to evacuate. Well, in a new update, the IDF is urging citizens in more than 25 areas, including the city of Nabatiyeh, to head north. Well, in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah fighters and Israeli forces are exchanging fire following the stalling of a ground incursion after 8 Israeli soldiers were killed in an ambush. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by General Nimrod Sheffer, a distinguished former fighter pilot who served as the head of the planning directorate for the IDF. Now, following on from your esteemed military career, General, you transitioned to the defense industry. You served as the CEO and president of the Israel Aerospace Industries. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I'd like to start by asking about those 180 missiles that were fired at Israel by Iran on Tuesday. Israel is weighing up a response. Do you think it's fair to say it's more of a question of when, not if, and also a question of how Israel hits back? How do you see things moving forward?
First of all, I don't like the word response or retaliate. I think that Israel should take initiative. And what we saw during the last month in Lebanon mainly suggests that Israel took initiative. And if I can say it, I think it's clear that Iran attacked Israel as a retaliation for the last Israeli attack on the Dahia quarter in Beirut. So I think that Israel should take initiative and strike Iran really hard this time in order to say the following: Iran, we can hit you hard, way harder than you can hit us. And just to make it clear, we just eliminated Hamas as a military power. It's not anymore military organization, just some terrorists that can harm us, but very lightly. And Hezbollah in the north, which was the main military tool in the hands of Iran, was hurt so badly that I think it's not incapable, but way weaker than it was. So I think Israel will attack in Iran. Definitely, it's a matter of when. And how, I don't really know, but I think it should take military assets and also strategic assets of Iran. I don't think it should aim any civilians or civilian property or anything like that, but definitely military capacities like air defense or so, that what I would do, and more than that, some strategic targets. And really I think the strategy should aim to stop that war and say to the Iranian supreme leader, that's enough.
There are some red lines, aren't there, that were drawn up by the United States. They said none of Iran's nuclear facilities. Do you think Israel will respect those red lines laid out by the United States?
I hope so. And I think, yes. And for me, it doesn't make any sense to try and attack nuclear assets. Definitely, it's not only in Israel, an Israeli issue, it's a global issue. And the way to deal with that is a United States-led coalition. And I believe that Israel would not act against the United States' clear requests and against the United States strategy in the Middle East, definitely prior to elections. And I believe Israel will respect that.
Just going back to Tuesday night's Iranian attacks on Israel, more than 180 missiles were fired in total. Fragments of those weapons are being collected across the country. And I'm just wondering why they do that. And I'm guessing it so they can analyse what types of weapons were used. Does anything strike you from what we know at this stage about anything significant with regards to the weapons that were used by Iran on Tuesday night?
No. As much as I know, of course, I'm not sitting in the deepest rooms, but as much as I know, and I know some, there wasn't any surprising weapon. The Iranians were talking about hypersonic missiles. I don't think they have any. They have ballistic missiles, several kinds of, with large warheads, like half a ton or maybe more, 750 kilos probably, but nothing that surprised us. And when you look at the results of the defense systems, the Arrow system mainly, you can tell that the success was such a big success that I don't see any real change in what we thought or believed they had.
How much of a difference did the US and UK assistance on Tuesday night help Israel when it comes to averting much more serious damage? Because if I'm not mistaken, almost all of those 180 missiles were shot down. Some, we understand, intercepted by Israel's allies. Just tell us a little bit about the role and the importance of the role played by those allies.
Yeah, there's a big difference between the role of the United States and the role of the UK. The UK, actually, they already announced it. They sent a couple of fighter aircrafts that didn't really do much because there weren't any drones or UAVs sent by the Iranians. All the attack was done by ballistic missiles. But the United States support was very, very important and meaningful. The United States helped in intercepting some of the missiles, which was a very great help. And there's also parts of the regional players that took part in that attack, and I cannot elaborate on that. But it's not only the US and the UK, it's a multinational effort. And the region is very, very meaningful in supporting the state of Israel and others, because, you know, when Iran launch missile, it can easily hit Jordan, for example. So the region participated in a very good way, supporting that effort, the defense effort, which was very successful. Actually, very few missiles hit the ground, and I don't think that any major damage was caused, and only one casualty in Jericho. But I think afterward it was a the attack failed. Very successful defense play. The attack really failed completely.
Doesn't that depend on what the objectives of the attack were? And we've had analysts saying it was a show of defiance, if you will, some sort of a show of force put on by Iran on Tuesday night for a domestic audience. Do you think they actually, knowing that you've got David Sling, the Iron Dome, the Arrow systems in place, and yet there were, I believe, 2 casualties, you mentioned them, I think they were injured by shrapnel. I mean, it doesn't sound like Iran perhaps even intended to cause any meaningful damage. What's your assessment?
Well, my assessment is very clear about this question. On the night of 14th of April, definitely it was just a show of force. They sent about 300 and some articles, drones, UAVs, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, but they didn't really try to harm Israel, just to show that they're not hesitating to directly attack Israel. This time it was very different. They launched almost 200 ballistic missiles almost simultaneously. And that is what they thought will be the right method to defeat the defense systems. And they failed in that. So the fact that they launched so many missiles, and only ballistic missiles, and almost simultaneously proves that they meant to cause damage, and they did not launch it on 200 different targets, but relatively on few targets, meaning they try to be very accurate at some assets, military assets mainly, and they failed. So I think my analysis is very clear. It was not a show of force. It was attack that was aimed to cause harm to Israel, very meaningful harm, and failed completely. And I think that if you look at the balance of power between Israel and Iran, you can see, probably we will be all able to see after the Israeli attack, again, it's only a matter of time as I see it, the damage that will be caused in Iran, and there is almost no way for them to prevent it.
General Sheva, for the benefit of our viewers who don't know very much, perhaps, about the technicalities of your defense systems, just tell us in very simple terms how the Iron Dome and David Sling actually work.
Well, in simple words, that's a mission I'm not sure I can fulfill. Anyway, the Israel defense system is a multi-layer defense system, active defense system, meaning by using the term active defense system, I mean that it contains several layers of different missiles that aim to hit the ballistic missile on its cruise towards Israel. And multi-layer means that we have different types of defense systems that could hit the ballistic missile very far from Israel. And if we fail, can try again a little bit closer. If we fail, we can try a little bit closer. And then the Iron Dome is the last layer that could hit in very low level, very rapidly. And the defense system is also the system that sends the alert to the civilians to go back to shelters and to defend themselves. So this is a combination of early warning, active defense, and shelters. A combination of those three methods really, it's not a foolproof, never it's a foolproof, but it decreases the odds that people will get hurt dramatically. And we saw very, very few casualties and wounded people.
General Sheva, in the past, I know you've spoken out and criticized in no uncertain terms the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. How many people would you say amongst your former and current military colleagues, I mean colleagues who are still in the military, share those concerns, do you think, about the direction in which Netanyahu has taken Israel?
Well, I will give you the easier answer because I don't know the answer to your question, but about 70%, between 2/3 to 70% of the Israeli population do not have any confidence in the Israeli government. So this is the answer to your question. And the reason I lost confidence in Benjamin Netanyahu was that he's responsible for the most devastating failure of the state of Israel since its inauguration in 1948. After so many years in position, in power, Israel failed so dramatically. So any leader that faces this reality should say, okay, I cannot serve anymore as a leader. So this is first. And second, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu leads Israel through the last year in such a poor way. He doesn't have any strategy. He doesn't aim to end the war. He doesn't say what type of end state he wants to see to the war, not in the south, not in the north. So that's my criticism about it. It's nothing to have with his character or anything like that. But just those two factors, the great failure of October 7th and the poor way he leads Israel. And there is more. His very extreme government is causing a lot of damage to the state of Israel. But I leave it aside for a second. This is why I'm so critical about Netanyahu.
Yeah, I mean, he's taken on a battle on so many fronts: Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, Syria. I mean, do you think having a battle on so many fronts is sustainable? And can he achieve, do you think, what he's trying to achieve, if indeed we know what he's trying to achieve?
Yeah, the answer is no, it's not sustainable. But what Netanyahu tries to achieve, as I see it, according to his actions, is just to stay in power. Any leader who would see the future of Israel as the most important thing he deals with would say, okay, this is my strategy to end the war as soon as I can, to defeat my enemies as soon as I can, to bring back the deported people in the north as soon as I can, to eliminate Hezbollah and Hamas as soon as I can, to make whatever I can to make sure that Iran doesn't enter the game as soon as I can. Just to remind you, Netanyahu is responsible not only to October 7th, but he's the first leader in the history of Israel who suffered direct attack from Iran twice. So there's nothing that I can say to his favor, not because I dislike him or anything like that. It's not that. Just the situation he brought Israel into is the most dangerous since 1948. So there's nothing good to say about that. And it's not sustainable, no. We should make a stop to that.
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli army's had casualties already in its incursions in southern Lebanon, and a lot of military analysts told us that Hezbollah did have the upper hand when it came to what was happening on the ground in southern Lebanon. I mean, not surprisingly, it's where they're from, it's where they've got traps, it's where they've got weapon stores. So do you think it was a mistake from a strategic and a military point of view to go into Lebanon on the ground on the part of the Israeli army?
For itself, I don't think it's a mistake. You cannot judge a military action without the context. And I think that if this operation is part of the grand strategy of the state of Israel, it's okay. Without a strategy, I'm not sure. The current goal of the ground forces is to try and destroy the infrastructure that Hezbollah built along the border. All along the borders, there are posts and command posts and launching pads and ammunition storage, like a lot of assets that Hezbollah built during the years. And I think that the mission is a good mission to destroy it. Whatever you cannot destroy with airstrikes, to destroy from the ground. But I ask myself, okay, what is the goal of that? So when is it going to end? And what is the end state? What could be counted as a victory of the ground forces? And I'm not sure, because I didn't hear none of the leaders relating to that. So I think that ground operation could be good and could be bad, but you have to put it in context and to say, okay, where does it lead to? I'm not sure we have the answer for that. I didn't hear it from the Israeli government.
And this is my last question to you. I mean, we're talking about where we see things heading to from here. I mean, more broadly and more specifically with regards to Iran. Israel is, you say, going to respond. Iran says it will then respond in kind, although we did hear the Iranian president saying he doesn't want a war. I don't know what we read into that. Does that sound like someone who thinks they couldn't win a war, or does that sound like someone who genuinely doesn't have the appetite for a war? But in any case, do you see it as an inevitability at this stage that your country is going to go into an all-out war with Iran?
Well, I think we can avoid that. I think that the Israeli attack in Iran is inevitable. I think that that's going to happen anyway. But I believe that if the United States mainly, but the international community will send the right messages to Iran, saying nobody wants a war, not even the Israelis, but they had to strike after 200 missiles were launched from Iran to Tel Aviv. I think that if the right messages will be sent and the Israeli attack will be containable, maybe it's the right term, I think we can avoid an all-out war. Nobody wants it, and I think we can avoid it. As I understand the balance of powers, Israel could cause to Iran way harder damage than Iran could cause to Israel. But anyways, I say it not because I think it's the right way to go through. I think it's the wrong way to go through. But if that happens, that would be the case.
OK, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya News. General Nimrod Shefer, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
My next guest was appointed Lebanon's Minister of Economy and Trade 3 years ago, amidst the country's most severe economic crisis in living memory. Well, as Economy Minister, he's been trying to stabilise Lebanon's economy, tackle inflation and negotiate reforms with international organisations in the hope that it will secure much-needed financial aid for the country. So where does this latest situation leave an already severely bruised Lebanese economy? Well, Amin Salam joins us now. Amin, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us on Al Arabiya News. Just tell us, first of all, how ordinary Lebanese citizens are surviving each day. Are there, for example, empty shelves in the shops? Are people managing to find enough to eat?
We are, Beirut particularly, is a city under fire since last night. The conditions are really, the only way you can describe them is that it is a nation in crisis. We have over 1,200,000 displaced people. A majority of those are Lebanese. There's a big number as well of Syrians that are in the city of Beirut and Mount Lebanon as well. I mean, the conditions are dire. The day-to-day life is very challenging due to the security concerns, due to the displaced people. And as I said earlier in one of the interviews, it's an unprecedented number of displaced people in less than 5 days. To have 1 million people displaced in less than 5 days in a small city like Beirut you can imagine how stressful that can be on the social level, on the economic level, and on the day-to-day life. However, having said that, I can assure for you that we have worked around the clock, particularly the Ministry of Economy and Trade, to secure the entry of all the needed food, products, all the needed day-to-day, materials that are used by the people. Yes, people are rushing to supermarkets to buy quantities to store with the fear that the situation might escalate, that they might lose access to those products. But I have announced yesterday through our emergency committee that we have food for 4 to 5 months stocked in Lebanon, because we already took those measures 2 years ago, given that we have been living in an emergency mode for over 3 to 4 years now. So As far as food security, we are good. No one is having any problems finding food despite the high demand. We have received a lot of aid as well on the medical side. We have received a lot of aid on the shelter needs, including bedding and other items.
That's reassuring. But let's not forget that before Lebanon found itself in the situation it's in right now, 50% of the population had been plunged below the poverty line. Presumably that number is now going to rise. I want to ask you, before the Israeli airstrikes began, before troops began their ground operation, I mean, if we put the clock back a couple of months, was the Lebanese economy showing some signs of emerging from what's been a number of years of dire crisis?
Well, thank you for pointing that out, because yes, I mean, I say it with a heavy heart. Early 2023 was a period where we started really working on, we stabilized the exchange rate of the Lebanese lira, stopped, did much control over the inflation effects on the Lebanese lira and the market. We had an excellent tourism season. We were booming on the agricultural side, opening up doors to new markets. All that was gone when the war started, unfortunately. We were expecting growth in, between 2 to 2.5% early 2024. That as well was an expectation that was unfortunately not accomplished due to the war, let alone the effect of everything happened on the GDP. We were looking at 50% unemployment before the war. Today, we're looking at numbers way beyond that. I'm even scared to talk about the real numbers we have today on unemployment, particularly with about 1 million people, including probably 40% or 50% of those people are the working force in the south and the Bekaa and parts of Beirut. So it is devastating. It is very difficult, and it doesn't look good. That's why we're doing everything possible today to be able to get to a ceasefire, pull this country together and try to bring back the economy and the social situation to a better place. Because any extension or any further prolonging this war will take us to a very, very difficult place to come back from.
Yeah, I mean, international institutions like the IMF have asked of your country reforms in order to unlock urgently needed assistance. But under these current conditions, it's pretty unrealistic, isn't it, to think about implementing reform?
Well, unfortunately, I totally agree with you. I mean, before the war, we already had the political tensions in Lebanon and the political, parties in Lebanon not helping a lot make the reforms pass through. I mean, we as a government sent all the laws to the parliament to be ratified, and then they went into the political turmoil between the different political parties. And those reform and recovery laws were supposed to get us to a final deal with the IMF. So now today we are a country without a president. We are a country with a full-blown war. It's going to be difficult to pull this together. I mean, the parliament is not getting together to elect a president. I don't think they will get together to do any reforms. And that is very destructive to the country, to the future, to the hope we had for a better economy. However, we will keep pushing. But most importantly now, we need a ceasefire. We need a little bit of stability and quiet in the country to be able to get back to the economy. Because with what's going on now, our priority is helping the people, standing by the people, and try to transition through this unfortunate war.
Minister, we haven't got much time, but I want to ask you about something that was said to CNN's Christian Amanpour by your colleague, the Foreign Minister of Lebanon, Abdullah Abu Habib, who said that just before he was killed, Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a 21-day ceasefire. I'm just wondering whether you heard the same thing, And as an extension of that question, I'd like to ask you, what went through your mind when you got the news of Hassan Nasrallah's death?
Well, I mean, this was the tipping point of the escalation because this took the war into a completely different level. Before the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, we were seriously working as a government with all the political parties involved, including Hezbollah, who's a member of the government, and myself as well was pushing on a lot of messages that the economy, the situation cannot bear escalation. So everybody, including Hezbollah, was very well aware that we need to think very patriotically at the moment for Lebanon. We need to be very strategic in our interests in the deal being put together in the region and try to let Lebanon avoid what happened. Now we are in the eye of the storm between those massive countries. I'm talking about Iran, I'm talking about Israel, I'm talking about all the serious players trying to resolve their conflicts on the grounds of Lebanon. So what we are saying today, and back to your question, yes, our Minister of Foreign Affairs was right when he said everybody, including Hezbollah, wanted to get to a ceasefire and was trying to do those rules of engagement thing to the dot to try to avoid any escalation. But this is long gone now. We are at a different place now. We are thinking now of a retaliation from Israel back to Iran and how this is going to spill over to the region. I think what's happening is very, very dangerous, not just to Lebanon, to the whole region. And we are a small country that's paying a very high price of that struggle.
And just to hold you on that point about what went through your mind when you received the news of Nasrallah's death, just tell us very briefly, because I know we're nearly out of time, where were you and what did you think when you got that news?
Well, I believe I was here in the city of Beirut, visiting one of the shelters and one of the schools, and then the official announcement came out before the attack happened. Everybody was in shock because nobody knew, including myself, what is going to happen right after that. The first thing that got to my mind is that there's going to be an unbelievable escalation on all fronts, whether it's from the Hezbollah side, whether it's from Iran, whether it's from everybody that will retaliate for such an action. However, I mean, we were happy to see that there was a lot of control after the assassination happened, still to avoid going to a full-blown war. Even though it was a serious hit, it was a very massive operation. It shocked all of the country, and particularly Hezbollah, but they still calculated things and still tried to stick to the rules of engagement, I believe, until today.
Minister, this month marks 2 years since President Michel Aoun left office. You've had no head of state for 24 months now. I mean, do you think an interim president can be installed, on an emergency basis, and would that help the situation?
Well, that's part of our struggle as a nation today. We are a country without a head. We are a country without a head of state. And when you are a country without a head of state, you are the most vulnerable, link in the equation. And today in the Middle East, we all know that in the UN General Assembly meetings, behind closed doors, there's a deal being put together for the Middle East. And when you are a country without a head of state, you are very vulnerable to get the end of the deal, the far bad end of the deal. That is why we are pushing as well on all political parties in Lebanon, because they can do that very fast, very quick in the interest of the country to do a parliamentary session and elect the president. There are several options that are, nominated, and that would help the position of Lebanon. That will help us find a proper seat on the table of negotiations for the next, I wouldn't say few months, probably few weeks on the future of the region. And that will be a healthy approach for Lebanon. Today, we are completely paralyzed. institutionally, paralyzed, and that puts us in a very difficult place to negotiate, to get the country all together, to sit with other heads of state, etc., etc. So it is a major issue. But an interim president, back to your question, I'm sorry, I had to explain all the background and the important piece, but an interim president now is not possible. I mean, they would need to really do a full-blown, agreement, get the parliament together, elect officially a fully recognized constitutional president for us to be able to pull the country together at such a difficult moment.
I mean, Lebanon's politicians really owe it to the people of Lebanon to come together at a time like this. Well, they've owed it to them for several years now to come together and help the country get back on track. I mean, are you saying that you're not seeing really any signs whatsoever of people trying to build bridges, put rifts to one side and act in the best interests of Lebanon rather than in the best interests of sects, groups, clans, whatever you want to call them?
Well, as an independent minister, I can tell you, since I don't belong to any political party, I can tell you, unfortunately, you described it way better than the way I wanted to describe it. No, they are still after the interest of their sects, their narrow interests, the interest of their parties, each on his own way, how he sees the next Lebanon coming together. Many are still thinking of only getting the best seat on the table and dividing the wealth of the government. So we haven't seen yet this drastic change towards anti-corruption, a better Lebanon, a patriotic thinking, or dreaming of the future of Lebanon. Because if that was there, we would have had a president 2 years ago. We would have had a president a year ago. We would have had president when this war started. Or, more importantly, we should have seized this opportunity when the war came to Lebanon really big and elected the president, to help the country be stronger, be more constitutional, and give reassurance to the people and the international community. That didn't happen. So, yes, we are still not at the serious moment.
This is my very last question to you. Lebanon has a lot of allies in the world. There's a lot of goodwill towards Lebanon in the world. What is your parting message to Lebanon's allies, to world diplomats, world leaders, to help your country to avert any further disaster? What's your message?
Well, as the youngest member of this cabinet, and as a patriotic Lebanese that really is looking and dreaming of the future of this country, first of all, I would say thank you to the international community. Thank you to all the friends of Lebanon. I know you all love Lebanon, and we all love whoever is today extending the arm of help to Lebanon. We know, and you know, that this country deserves better, and we can do better, and we can make it a very beautiful spot on the Mediterranean again. It can be a haven for investment and beautiful things. So we will put all our faith in our friends and in all the countries supporting Lebanon today to help us get out of this critical situation, because we know very well that Lebanon was always influenced and was always aided by our international friends who can make a big difference. We are working internally to get to that place, and we hope you will be next to us in the next, few critical weeks and months to solve this issue.
Okay, thank you so much. Amin Salam, Lebanon's Minister for Economy and Trade. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by the former head of the Israel Defense Forces Operations Directorate, retired Major General Israel Ziv, who's been at the forefront of many key operations for Israel's security. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, General. Monday will, of course, mark the first anniversary of the 7th of October Hamas attacks. You were in Israel at that time, and as soon as you heard news of the attacks, it's reported that you took immediate action. You armed yourself with a 9mm pistol. Just tell us what you did on that day.
Well, like every Saturday, I was doing my biking, but once I've heard, like anybody else in Israel, that something is very wrong happening down there in next to Gaza, and I saw the video, you know, coming from the town of Sderot. I rushed back home, took my uniform, my pistol, and went immediately down to the area of Gaza. I was there at around 10 o'clock that morning, and actually from that moment on, I was there for the next day and few days. Look, it looked like the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. It was really terrible. A lot of burnt cars, bodies. I had to navigate along that road. And you know, was engaging several times the Nukhba terrorists themselves, and been able to be in some key places to help evacuate people from that horror attack, terrible attack that we had that day.
And here we are, General, almost a year later. Israelis this week once again had to take shelter in the face of those missile attacks from Iran. There were deadly knife and gun attacks as well in Israel, in urban areas. What's your opinion about how we break the cycle of violence? And I'd also like to ask for your prediction on how Israel is going to respond to what Iran did on Tuesday.
Actually, if you look at it, you know that it's all Iran-made. All those proxies. The Hamas became part of Iran arm. The Hezbollah was and still is the main arm for Iran to aim and to threat Israel. The same is all around. You know, they do build at this time a huge militia in Syria. They do similar thing, by the way, in Iraq on the border of Jordan, aiming to dismantle the government in Jordan, the king in Jordan, and goes all the way down to Yemen. This is part of their strategy, which is against Israel, but you know, mainly against Israel as a position of America, of the West. And apparently their doctrine is breaking down, mainly now by Israel. The Hamas is no longer there as a military terror army. It was dismantled completely. There are still terrorists there in Gaza, but they are not functioning as an organization. Hezbollah got a serious blow by Israel, and we continue trying to break down their command and control system and to push them away from our border. And apparently, Iran probably seeing that they cannot impact Israel from the proxies, they are trying to do it directly. Now we have a challenge, and I think it's together with the U.S., because that declaration of war by hitting us for the second time, it's against the warning of the United States, not only Israel. And I think we have a specific moment or window to have a bigger look, you know, if we just, you know, retaliate or give them kind of a blow, which Israel can do, or to go even further, because maybe it's time to see if we can change the whole excess of Iran in the Middle East and do something much bigger with the United States, not just by ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, there must be a lot of concern in Iran as to what happens next, not least from the people of Iran, who are quite mixed in their opinions about the direction their country is being taken in by the leadership, but also amongst the leaders who've been infiltrated. There are moles. Israeli intelligence has been on a roll the last couple of weeks. And are you saying basically that given the intelligence coups that Israel has had in recent weeks, this is not the right moment to be talking about ceasefires. It's the moment to carry on in the same vein. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that eventually, in the end, we need a ceasefire. We cannot, be in a war for so long time. But now, as we are now forced to face directly Iran. It was not by our invitation. I think maybe which we are already in a war. It's maybe time to do something more meaningful, because I'm afraid that if we cease fire now, it means that they would be able to recover quite soon, both the Hezbollah and in Iran. And I think we should go furthermore in order to make sure that the whole region become more stable or more peaceful for the next decade, and not to wait. What should be the right goal or the right target? It's a question. Maybe to go on the leadership. In the end of the day, the leadership of Iran, they may have the title of president, the big leader, etc., but in the end of the day, it's a country, it's a state of terror. They are the one to mess the Middle East and to destabilize the world. So I think that it's one of the conversations that we have now in closed doors with the Americans. We don't have to retaliate immediately, thanks to a very efficient defense system that prevented any serious, damage or loss of life mainly. But I think it's the right time to go for something even bigger. Yes.
You've suggested in the past that Prime Minister Netanyahu's priority is perhaps his own survival, and that prolonging the war in Gaza, for example, and now expanding the conflict to other countries would therefore appear to be more in his interest than in Israel's best interests. Do you still hold that opinion?
Look, we need to be more precise. Yes, there are political issues. I mean, there's no doubt. I still think like that. On the other hand, Hezbollah, for example, we did not declare war on Hezbollah. Hezbollah was the one, Nasrallah, his place now is with God. He was the one to open a war on Israel on October 8th. And as a part of Iranian doctrine, and he declared it. And Iran was the one, to go twice on Israel. Maybe they didn't like the idea of, decapitating Haniya, but in the end of the day, he was part of the enemies that was launching that aggressive attack on Israel. So with Netanyahu or without Netanyahu, I think we need to deal with our enemies. Putting that aside, Netanyahu has his own consideration, political consideration, and for example, I suggested, and I'm saying that out loud here in Israel, on every stage, that we should have wrapped up the front in Gaza and bring back the hostages and go only now on Hezbollah and Iran. But it's a war that was forced on Israel, and this is something else than Netanyahu. We have to deal with it.
Yeah, indeed. You described the situation in Gaza as being, and I quote you here, a dire quagmire. And a lot of the analysts and a lot of your former colleagues we've been speaking to are saying something quite similar here, which is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is showing that Israel's got tactics, but there isn't a strategy, there isn't an end game. Isn't it extremely dangerous, not just for your country, but for the entire region, that the man calling the shots in Israel doesn't have a strategy?
First of all, when in a war, sometimes when you start, and even if you have a doctrine or a strategy, you don't really know where it ends. So let's be fair on that. And it was proven, I think, almost all history. Yeah. On the other hand, yes, I still criticize the aspect that there is no clear strategy. It's more tactical than strategy. and we should aspire to a very clear goals, which are not clear. And the issue of Netanyahu, well, to be honest, yes, he is not alone. There is all the security echelon. There is the Minister of Defense, Mr. Gallant, which I trust very much, the Chief of Staff, and other people in that level, which I trust. And I think they know what they are doing. And right now, what they do is purely military. What we don't have well is the political aspect, which should, turn the military achievement into substantial political goals or achievement. And this is still, I think, lagging behind. And Netanyahu, he is doing, by the way, I think that some of his decisions are okay. But leading that to kind of a safe shore that will enable Israel to go back and to, some stability, I have my question marks as well.
So how Israel responds to what happened on Tuesday, those missile attacks on your country, will determine very much, won't it, whether or not we are on the precipice of an all-out war between Israel and Iran. I mean, where do you see things going to from here?
Look, we all, especially, the ones with the experience, we are all peace lovers and not war lovers, and because we know what war is. On the other hand, it's a point which we need to face reality. And I think that, Iran, small step from a nuclear capability, and the amount of proxies around Israel is such that once we start to break that blockade and facilitation of militaries all around us, and once we are already in it, I think we need a couple of more weeks in order to achieve more militarily, but mainly to know where we are up to politically in the area. And here I think that the discussions with the Americans, although it's not the best time for them during the election time, but still I think that they understand that it's also an opportunity to reduce tremendously the Iran threat, which is not just on the region, it's all over. And on the issue of Iran, I wouldn't advise to go very, from the belly and to be spontaneous. But if they ask my advice, I would rather to go much higher than what people would think, just to punish them and close it down. I think that Iran, it's a big problem for the whole world. And I suggest, by the way, it's not just for the Americans to join us. It has to be something much bigger than that, maybe to change the regime over there.
It sounds like that's what Netanyahu's got in mind, doesn't it? Because he said on Monday, he recorded a message to the Iranian people, and he said change is likely to come sooner than people might think. I mean, it sounds like either this is a sort of a psychological tactic he's using here, saying, well, we've managed to track down and kill Hassan Nasrallah and therefore send the message that perhaps someone else might be next. Or it sounds like he's got something in mind that really could bring about a change of governance and the regime there in Iran. What's your interpretation?
Yeah, but let's be honest. Going there, it's a little bit above the pay grade of even Netanyahu. It's something that the Americans should lead. And yes, I think that Israel is talking that direction. But I don't think that we will go so far only by ourselves without the Americans. And I don't think the Americans will give us a green light to go so far without them. So I think it's more a question, going to Washington, to the White House, than to Jerusalem, to Netanyahu.
Can you remember a time when the region was this unstable?
No. It's really mess going on around us. I agree. On the other hand, when somebody is opposing that on you, and you are managing it, I think even us, we are surprised, because in our doctrine or strategy, basic strategy, national strategy, we are not ready for such a long operations on one hand, and on the other hand, to go simultaneously on all the fronts, different fronts. On the other hand, we need to say that in the last 10 years, even more, Israel was preparing for such a war. By the way, not many people know, but the Arrow air defense missile, which was used to dismantle the ballistic missiles that came from Iran, were starting on the 80s. I think at the time of Prime Minister Rabin, he signed that agreement to develop them in 88. That was the beginning, of something 36 years ago. So Israel has the technology in its arsenal, to fight and to do a very serious impact very far away from here. But did we expect that scenario to happen? The answer is no, and I don't remember such times from all my military history.
Yeah, and I mean, we're no closer to achieving a peaceful outcome if we talk about the fact that, the death toll in Lebanon alone is now reckoned to be about 2,000, and that's just from a few days of airstrikes and the ground invasion. I mean, it might be said that intelligence looks like being Israel's greatest asset at this particular moment. I don't know if you agree with that. And therefore, it would be most sensible for Israel to focus on the intelligence aspect of things rather than more military campaigns in which civilians are going to get hurt and killed, and it's going to just fuel that cycle of violence from which there doesn't seem to be any way out. What are your thoughts on that, your final thoughts, because that's my last question?
Look, in Lebanon, I agree that Israel should not go for a full offense and takeover of South Lebanon. And what they are doing now, it's mostly raids on close contact infrastructure that Hezbollah prepared for similar attack that we met on the south from the Hamas. It was kind of a copy-paste that the Hamas took from Hezbollah, but Sinwar was jumping first, without anybody to know, even his partner. So going to those close areas and destroy that infrastructure, this is a must. This is a defensive act. But as far as I understand now, and this is also my view and recommendation, it's not about taking over or invasion to Lebanon. And I hope that kind of escalation will not take place. Definitely, also in Lebanon, there is a chance to change and maybe to bring Lebanon back to the Lebanese. And maybe it's time for the Lebanese army to deploy it in the south and take the place of Hezbollah and kick Hezbollah out, or to the north, or wherever. Maybe by the way, to call them to recruit to the Lebanese army. But for that, they need the assistance of the European. France, for example, can be very important in that respect. The US, of course. The British, if they are there, willing to support. And that would be, it's not for Israel, by the way. It's for Lebanon. So, yes, I think we should aspire to see a kind of a settlement that will bring back to stability. But not before something meaningful is done with Iran. Because, and by the way, maybe with Iran, the path should be political, because their economic situation is terrible. And maybe this new president has kind of a different approach. And maybe now, when they are threatened, it's the right time for them to go to that approach and agree on stopping the nuclear program. But we need to use that time not just to cease fire, but to have a serious political achievements.
Okay, but we're going to leave it there. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Retired Major General Israel Ziv, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by General Joseph Votel, a retired four-star U.S. Army general and commander of U.S. Central Command, overseeing military operations right across the globe. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. It remains to be seen how Israel's going to respond to Tuesday's missile attack by Iran. And you've suggested on U.S. media that we might see something much stronger this time around than what we saw in April. What are Israel's options?
Thank you. It's good to be with you. Well, I think Israel has a lot of options. They can go after a variety of different targets in Iran or of Iran's interest that are in the region. This could include command and control sites. It could include the launcher sites or other military bases that participate in the operation. It certainly could include the nuclear facilities associated with the nuclear weapons program, or it could be infrastructure and energy targets. For example, grid targets or facilities associated with the grid, or perhaps oil and gas facilities with a intent of impacting Iran's economic situation. But they also have a choice in how hard they can go. They can go as they did last time, with a relatively light response, really intending to send more of a message, or they can go a little bit heavier with the intention of not only sending a message but actually punishing. So there's a lot of options here, and it is my assessment that given the size of the Iranian attack a few days ago, that Israel will see that it is necessary not only to send a message, but actually to go after something which Iran values and make them pay a cost for it.
President Biden has said, of course, the US is fully supportive of Israel, but he did say there were some red lines. One of them was Iran's nuclear facilities, but you suggested that perhaps that could be a likely or possible target for Israel at this stage.
Well, I think the president has said, that he is not in favor of that. I don't know that completely excludes it from Iranian considerations. Ultimately, they will make the decision on this, and certainly the United States, as a key partner to Israel, will be involved in appropriate consultations and discussions about this. But ultimately, the decision is one for Israel to make, not for the United States.
Iran has said that it will step up its response if indeed it's attacked by Israel, counterattacked, I should say. Iran's also saying it doesn't want a war. How do we interpret a country that says we don't want war? Does that mean we don't think we could win one?
I think that certainly is part of it here. I think Iran appreciates that they will not prevail in a toe-to-toe fight with Israel if it came to that. I think in this latest round, I think that Iran was compelled to respond to Israel. I think there was a lot of pressure being put on them by Hezbollah and others within the so-called axis of resistance. They had not yet responded to anything over the last several weeks. So I think they felt that they were compelled to respond. They did. They did it in a strong manner. I think they did that recognizing that, one, that Israel would be well defended, and secondly, that any action would invite a counter reaction from Israel. So I think that what Iran is counting on is Israel's response to be of the nature that it was the last time, that there will be a response, but it will not be one which will, necessitate Iran to respond, and it will provide an opportunity to de-escalate, at least from the current cycle of violence.
One of the reports that really struck me the last couple of days suggests that there's a huge amount of paranoia in the corridors of power in Tehran, not least given the intelligence role that Israel seems to be on at the moment. They infiltrated Hezbollah in a way that I think nobody could have expected. Do you think they've managed to do the same with Iran? Do you think they've got the same level of intelligence, and perhaps they've got some surprises in store for Iran?
I think we've seen them demonstrate the Israelis demonstrate some pretty exquisite skills over the last several weeks. So I have to make the assumption that they do have good insight into Iranian decision-making, Iranian leadership, and just what is taking place and what might be vulnerable within all of that. I think your comments are exactly right. I mean, this is actually a resetting of some fundamental assumptions that have been made across the region. Iran has long counted on the fact that Hezbollah could be a deterrent, could be a principal deterrent to Israel, and that is proving to be false. And now Iran is in a situation where they are now having to reevaluate their assumptions, reevaluate how they establish deterrence against Israel, and I'm sure this is causing a lot of challenges. And on top of that, you stack the unprecedented success militarily that Israel has had now for almost 2 months.
Yeah, it's probably affecting morale on the Iranian side as well, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not only are they losing close partners, but they're actually losing some of their own in these activities.
There's a new president in Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. He rules over a divided country. Do you think there's scope? And we've heard overtures from Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier this week to the effect that, he was trying to win over hearts and minds there in Iran. Do you think he's on the right tracks there, or do you think this is wishful thinking?
Well, I think in general, I think it is a good idea to try to win over hearts and minds of the people. I mean, I think it's very well established that there's a large part of the Iranian population that does not care for the current Iranian regime. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two. So trying to get the Iranian people to recognize that the pain that is being inflicted on the region, the pain that's potentially going to be inflicted on their country, is largely a result of the choices which their government has made for a number of years now, is an important aspect in bringing other pressures to this to resolve the situation. There's a lot that can be done militarily, but I think the real skill here is going to be in not only applying military power, but diplomatic power, informational power, economic power, to really change behavior, the behavior of Iran and its proxy network here going forward. And I think that is what Israel is very, very focused on doing.
We've got a dangerous cocktail, though, of situations, circumstances in this region. We've talked about the paranoia in Iran. We've talked about power vacuums, with Hezbollah essentially being decapitated. We've got a great deal of uncertainty. There's a real risk, isn't there, of a miscalculation at some point. And some of the analysts we've spoken to this week have been echoing this. I mean, is that a concern that you would share?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with this. I mean, something could go wrong here, a response that goes awry, like we've seen, with Hezbollah's strike into the Golan Heights several weeks ago, could really be a precipitating event here. And so, yeah, this is high stakes risk management here on both sides, both for the Iranians and for the Israelis, and of course for the United States as well as a principal partner to Israel. So yeah, there's a lot that could go wrong here with this, and so these are not easy decisions. I think it's good that Israel seems to be taking a little bit of time to consider their response, and hopefully that will not only help them develop an effective response, but one that can be well managed, throughout the next cycle of wherever this current venture takes us.
And this is my last question, just sort of looking forwards, really. I mean, are you hopeful that we're going to find some sort of a diplomatic resolution to all of this, or do you think it's an inevitability that there's going to be a lot more violence before we get to the point that peace and ceasefires and the like are discussed?
Well, I as a soldier, I always have to be hopeful that there's an alternative to fighting forever, and so I do hope that we can get there. I don't see immediate indications of this at this particular time. But, one of the roles of military power is to create conditions so that our diplomats can come to the table here, that we can compel people to come to the table. They can make choices other than continue to employ military power and try to resolve these issues. And ultimately, that's what it's going to take. But that sometimes takes time to get to. And I think that's the situation that we're in right now, is that both sides. And as we've seen in Gaza, neither of the warring parties has seen it in their interest to come to the table yet, and that's probably because there's not been enough pressure created that would require that. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we will get to that. I don't see immediate signs of it right now.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us on Arabiya News. General Joseph Votel, thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Al Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
One of the biggest challenges, but one of the big advantages of doing a forum like this is it's fast-paced. And I know I'm having to get straight into this because I have only 15 minutes to tap into the expertise of my guest here. Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin is the Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union. And in the topics that we've been covering, one of the issues that has come up is how there is a need for greater international cooperation in order to build confidence in the cybersecurity space. I was pleased to discover, by the way, Ms. Bogdan-Martin is actually the first woman to head this organization, which has long-running roots. So the first time in 160 years.
That's right.
So I've been very honored to have guests, with this kind of achievement level, and we're seeing the world reshaping. So that's a very good thing. I'm going to start by just posing a couple of questions, if I may. And I guess one of the first things that would be of interest is that the World Summit on the Information Society Plus 20 review, the WSIS process, is now advancing. So how has the security landscape transformed in the 2 decades since that landmark WSIS event, the summit that took place in 2015, I think it was in 2 parts.
2 parts, 2003, 2005.
2005. That was my 20 years. And what are the most pressing challenges you're facing today?
Well, I think the landscape since then has changed dramatically. I mean, things are moving faster, getting smarter, being more complicated. And if we look back to 2003, 2005, those two phases, there were 1 billion people online, and we didn't have smartphones. So we fast forward to 2024, we have 5.4 billion people online. So the numbers in and of itself have changed things incredibly. Back in 2005, we were concerned about viruses. We were concerned about phishing. Some of us remember the attack on MySpace. Do you remember the MySpace attack, which was like the biggest attack at the time, when I think 1 million MySpace profiles were actually hacked? And then if we fast forward to July 2024, when we had the RockYou incident, 10 billion passwords were exposed. So again, I think it shows the big change and the big impact, because things have become so much more complicated. We now have artificial intelligence, which is also in some ways complicating things. We have ransomware. We have so much more sophistication. But I would say, I think the World Summit back then, in some ways, the outcome was somewhat ahead of its time, because it actually put building trust, confidence, safety, and security at the heart of the information society. A few weeks ago, actually last week in New York, at the Summit of the Future, member states adopted the Pact of the Future and the Global Digital Compact, which also puts at the core building trust and safety in the use of digital technologies, and of course in the cyber sphere. We know that cyber insecurity is amongst the top 10 risks, as announced by the World Economic Forum. And it just goes to show us that we have to do more, we have to do better, and we have to address, coming to your point about the challenges, because there's gaps. There's about securing critical infrastructure, and there's the capacity gaps, in particular in developing countries, where we need to do more to build that capacity.
Just an add-on thought, based on what you just said, when you go from an attack of a particular size to like 10 billion, from millions to billions, when the summits were taking place, 2003, 2005, was there any notion that it would scale up on this level? I mean, looking ahead, setting a 20-year review, was there any idea it would be on such a great scale?
I mean, I don't think we ever imagined. Look at just the past year and a half and how generative AI has sort of swept the planet. So I don't think we understood how quickly the technology would evolve. But we knew that we had to be building safety by design in already back in the day.
Now, ICT, information and communications technology, it continues to evolve, as you just indicated, at an incredible pace. So one of the biggest issues now is, of course, strengthening global cybersecurity. How is that progressing? Is it on the right track? And can you highlight the areas where the most progress has been made and perhaps where there are still some gaps remaining?
Yeah. I think we are progressing on the right track, but we need to do more. We need to go faster. We need to go deeper. We have a global cybersecurity agenda that we laid out back in 2007, and I actually think it's still very relevant today. It highlights the importance of the kind of legal regulatory framework, the technical framework that's needed, the operational preparedness that countries need to put in place, the capacity building piece being critical, and then the last piece of that agenda is about cooperation. Cooperation domestically and, of course, cooperation internationally. We have seen from the ITU perspective more and more countries putting in place national cybersecurity strategies, which is a great first step. We have more than 120-something countries that have strategies. We also have a bit more that have put in place computer incident response teams. So we have CERTs. That's also good. But how effective are they? I think that's where we have to do more, and that goes to the point about capacity development. I think least developed countries, small island developing states, they need more support.
I mean, you're a global organization with a global responsibility. And the challenge, of course, now is we see the world in some instances, I know it's a variable thing, it goes up and down, but it seems to be going into blocks and silos. So cooperation must be a lot harder when you're having to deal with, especially when there's conflict involved too, but how are you coping with that, keeping it integrated?
So we have to look at it holistically. I think you're right on point there. It's not about telecommunications as a silo in and of itself, as it was perhaps in the past. It's about digital and how it cuts across every sector of the economy. So the implications on if you have a cyber attack. I often think about the Bruce Willis Die Hard 4. And back then we thought, oh my God, could that ever happen? Well, it really can happen. And it shows that if there's an attack on the critical infrastructure, on the energy grid, if there's an attack on a healthcare institution, if there's an attack on a schooling, on a financial institution, it cuts across everything. And so cyber strategies need to be holistic, and they can't be addressing single silos.
Die Hard 4 is one thing. CrowdStrike did the same thing, and it wasn't even intentional. Now, keeping up with the skill sets needed to navigate the landscape of ICT and especially cybersecurity is obviously of a real concern. The global report on workforce shortage and skills gap has just been released, a shortage of 2.8 million in this particular sector. So what sort of picture does it paint in terms of the size of that, the size of that gap, and what sort of collective action can be taken to address that?
It's a big challenge. If we don't fill that gap, we're going to continue to be weak, I think in particular for more vulnerable populations, for developing countries, small island developing states. So I think we have to start younger. We have to start in our education systems. We just had a chat on child online protection. I think that's critical. So we have to be engaging young people to bring the understanding of what kind of careers look like when it comes to the digital space, when it comes to cybersecurity. So the education starting younger is critical. And to do that, I think we have to have good role models. We have to tackle perceptions and bias, because there's a lot of them. And we definitely, you mentioned you were in the session yesterday, we need more women, because the cyber workforce has a huge gap. We have an overall skills workforce gap, but we have a huge gap when it comes to women. That represents some 20% when it comes to cybersecurity. So I think more skilling is needed. Things like our Girls in ICT Day actually help expose opportunities, and we need governments to be investing in this as well.
Yesterday, in that panel on which I was moderating, it was interesting in my research to have discovered that in the AI sector, for example, the percentage of women is about 22. It's very low. And yet, historically, women were more involved with computer sciences right through the early 20th century. In the 40s, it was almost like a peak, and then diminished because of, as you say, attitudes, the stigma that women can't be in computer sciences and engineering of this sort. And that is, I think, hopefully changing. Is that something you're finding?
It's changing slowly.
Really?
Too slowly. And I think we have to be more targeted when it comes to women in the tech sector, because it's a problem that continues. So if you don't have women when it comes to artificial intelligence, if they're not engaged in the development of algorithms, we will be creating AI that mirrors the bias that exists in our society today. So we need to have more women designing, creating when it comes to the tech space.
And it is interesting because if the women aren't there in the programming and the prompting, as it's now seen with AI, the bias is set into the computer science itself, and that can have a negative impact too.
Absolutely.
So what about at an international level, getting these skill sets raised? How are you able to encourage or collaborate that through your organization? What are you able to do?
So we have a number of skilling programs, including with the Kingdom, which is exciting.
That's right, yeah.
So we start with youth. We have a pretty robust youth program that offers skilling. We have an ITU Academy that also provides skilling for free, from basic digital literacy to more advanced skilling. We also just launched an artificial intelligence skilling coalition, which is also quite exciting. So we need to be skilling not just government representatives, but also the public at large.
And I guess, in regions like the Middle East and countries like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there's no kind of legacy baggage. People are able to advance here very quickly. The changes are rapid, so the impact can be that much faster too.
Huge. I think the potential to leapfrog is tremendous. And of course, I look to the Sustainable Development Goals. We have our 17 goals. 17% of the targets are on track, or off track, I should say. Actually, the UNSG said it was 15%, so it's actually much less. But with digital technologies, we can accelerate progress on almost every single target, every indicator, and every goal. And so it's a huge opportunity to leapfrog in every sector.
How receptive are you finding institutions and governments to your goals?
I think the results of the Summit of the Future and the Global Digital Compact speak for themselves. Member states united around a compact that embraces closing the digital divide, inclusive digital economies, free, safe, open internet, data governance, and artificial intelligence governance. So around those principles, I think it's pretty clear that the world wants an inclusive, safe digital future for all.
From what you have seen, certainly the progress we've talked about and how rapid it's been, what are your expectations for the next 20 years when it comes to the next review?
I think it's going to be very exciting. But at the same time, I'm also realistic. I do think that we have to put in place the right measures to balance the risks of cyber insecurity, the risks around misuse when it comes to artificial intelligence, the kind of scary things we see when it comes to deep fakes and other manipulations. So we do have to balance the regulatory frameworks with something that doesn't stifle innovation. We want that innovation. We know the benefits are huge, but we have to be managed and balanced in our approach.
It's always that, isn't it? The balance between regulation and the freedom to move forward.
Yes.
Where is that balance right now?
It's still being discussed. I think you have a handful of countries that are leading the discussions, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. At the ITU, we're trying to bring all those discussions to the table through our AI for Good Global Summit, also through the work that we do on our Global Cybersecurity Index, where we tier groups of countries. So trying to be able to share practices and make sure we do better.
I guess one of the biggest benefits is all eyes are on this space now.
Absolutely.
And resources are being put in for it.
And it can do good, and that's what we want. We want to leverage digital technologies for good.
Well, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, so nice to speak with you. I'm sorry we have had to race through this, but it still was very productive. Big round of applause, please. Doreen Bogdan-Martin.
Thank you.
Budapest. Many would consider Budapest a favorite city in Europe. It boasts of great architecture comparable to none, and lets us in on its sophisticated scene that's impossible for any other city to imitate. Here are some things you'll appreciate about Budapest. A visit to the city's thermal baths is a must. Try soaking in the Széchenyi baths, although of course there are countless other baths to choose from. A cruise via the Danube River is another thing you must do in Budapest. Nighttime is the best time to try this. There are special cruises being offered as ways to maximize your scenic trip along the river. For one, you can have a buffet-style dinner cruise while on board. Definitely a feast for the eyes, but may become an educational tour for you too. One of the greatest bridges in the world is Budapest's Chain Bridge. It's the best place in the city for romantic evening strolls. It has a well-known story behind it too. The architect who had created it was greatly proud of his work that he challenged anyone to find fault in the bridge. It was soon discovered that the lions that stand guard at the opposite ends are missing their tongues, and his genius work remains forever. Budapest is also known for its great undergrounds. The labyrinth of Buda Castle is one of the 7 wonders of the underground world. The place has also got many stories to tell, having closed down in 2011, but has already reopened. There are also many cave systems along Budapest to tour, for both a learning and travel experience. There are also wine cellars in the city, which are part of the vast labyrinth system winding beneath Buda Castle. The cellars vary, but are all suitable for wine tasting. It's an experience to learn more about their wine culture. For both learning and travel experience. For shopping, there's the Central Market Hall. Here you'll find the typical Hungarian products. You'll find everything there, from the world-famous sausages, paprika, to their wines. Fresh vegetables are also among the great buys in the market. You'll also find great souvenirs to buy there, such as wares and traditional Hungarian embroidery.
In a world driven by constant change, understanding the news has never been more essential.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories that matter from every corner of the globe.
With trusted journalism and deep insights, we provide you with the context and analysis that help you see the full picture.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
And conversations with those shaping the future.
We deliver the knowledge and perspectives you need.
Arabiya News,
where knowledge
meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers.
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs,